Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Daenerys III. A knock at the door brought the young queen out of her troubled thoughts. She looked up. Enter. Ser Barristan and Ser Jorah entered, both looking confused as to why their queen summoned him. Ser Jorah was hard at work reconstructing the gold cloaks, whose ranks had been ravaged by corruption, and the taking of the city had also taken a toll on their ranks. Ser Barristan was still working on making a few of Daenerys' Queensguard more capable members. Your Grace, is everything all right? Ser Barristan asked curiously. Daenerys gestured to the other two seats at the table. Please sit, I wish to ask you something. The two men shared a glance before sitting down. Jorah leaned forward. How can we help? Khaleesi. Robb Stark mentioned my father and brother at the meeting. I am not naive. I am not unaware of the name given to my father. What I want to know is if it is true. Neither men were able to meet Daenerys' piercing gaze, but their body language spoke volumes to the young queen. She had known that there was something they weren't telling her. She had known for months, but she didn't like that it had been revealed by Robb Stark. So it's true then, all of it. Jorah's head snapped up. You are not your father, Khaleesi, he said immediately. That's what I'm asking, Ser Jorah. She shot back. Is it true? Was my father mad and did my brother rape the Stark girl? Jorah opened his mouth to reply, then shut it, not able to answer. So Ser Barristan finally spoke up. It is unknown whether your brother raped Lyanna Stark, he said quietly. But it is known that she went with him, the two fleeing to Dorne. How is this known? Eddard Stark went south at the end of the war, after breaking the Tyrell siege on Storm's End. When he returned to the north, he brought the bones of his sister with him. Jorah rumbled sadly. So you are putting your faith in a man who revolted against his lawful king, Daenerys said indignantly. Barristan shook his head. Lord Stark was an honorable man. No one, not even Rhaegar, would be able to dispute that, he said, catching his queen by surprise. Daenerys glared at both men, unable to help the overwhelming anger and embarrassment that was bubbling inside of her. This was information she needed to know before coming to Westeros. She had known about her father's moniker, but Viserys had always argued that it was a baseless lie crafted by the usurper and his supporters. It seemed like it wasn't a lie. Tell me the whole truth, she demanded. Khaleesi, Ser Jorah asked. Tell me about the usurper's rebellion, she snapped. Ser Jorah looked over at Ser Barristan, who was gazing at the tabletop. The exiled knight sighed and began the long, sorry tale. It all started at the tourney of Harrenhal, he said reluctantly. It was the biggest event in the last 20 years. Every noble family was represented in some way or another. Rhaegar Targaryen won the joust, and instead of naming his wife the Queen of Love and Beauty, he named Lyanna Stark, Robert Baratheon's betrothed, instead. Why would he do that? Daenerys asked. Jorah shook his head. To this day, no one knows. Baratheon was angered. But after the tournament, things seemingly returned to normal. Then Rhaegar rode north with 3 of his Kingsguard, and took Lyanna Stark. Whether she went willingly or not is still unknown. But Brandon Stark didn't take it well. He showed up at the capital demanding Rhaegar to face him. He was imprisoned, and the king summoned his father Rickard Stark to the capital to answer for his son. The Lord of Winterfell demanded a trial by combat, and the Northern Knights stopped, unable to continue. What happened? Daenerys asked, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. Ser Jorah shook his head, forcing the queen to turn her attention to Ser Barristan. Ser Barristan, please, what happened? Lord Rickard demanded trial by combat, and your father declared fire as his champion, he said wearily. Lord Stark was burned alive in his armor in front of the entire court, while his son was garroted and a sword was placed in front of him. He was told that if he could reach the blade, then he could go free. He choked to death trying to save himself and his father. Daenerys thought she was going to throw up. All this time, all the rumors that her brother had dismissed, they were all true. Her family were murderers and kidnappers. She squeezed the table. What happened after? Heir's madness had control of him by that point, Jorah said, taking up the story once more. He saw assassins and spies everywhere. After Lord Stark and his heir were killed, he called for the heads of Rickard's second son, Eddard, and his best friend Robert Baratheon. Both men were wards to Jon Arryn, Lord Paramount of the Vale. Instead of giving up his wards, Arryn raised his banners in revolt. Stark went north and rallied his country, while Baratheon did the same, in the south. Barristan sighed. The new Lord Stark married Catelyn Tully, and Lord Arryn married her sister, securing Hoster Tully and the Riverlands. Nearly a year later, Tywin Lannister sacked the capital and Jaime Lannister put his sword in Aerys's back. But the true downfall of the Targaryen dynasty was at the Battle of the Trident, when Robert Baratheon smashed in Rhaegar's chest on the Ruby Ford. Daenerys sat back in her chair, trying to comprehend all this. After all this time, she had thought that the return of House Targaryen would be a wonderful sight for Westeros. She had expected the houses once loyal to her family to flock to her side and help her retake the lands of her ancestors. Now, after more than 20 years of exile, she has returned to find out that more than half of the Seven Kingdoms have pledged themselves to the man known as the Young Wolf. Jorah gazed at her. "Khaleesi, you are not your father," he insisted. "You are good and kind and caring. You are the queen the people need." "Am I?" she challenged. "Let us speak plainly. Most of Westeros have declared for Robb Stark, a man who has a wife and soon an heir. You hold the Iron Throne," Sarah Jorah pointed out. Daenerys scoffed. "What good does that do me when my father and brother destroyed our house's reputation?" Ser Barristan looked up. "Your Grace, I understand that this was not what you intended to come back to. How were any of us to know that Robb Stark would declare himself king? But the compromise Varys suggested seems fair. Allow Stark to keep his lands, you keep yours, and allow the children of the two unions to marry and bring the realm together again. My betrothed seems to think we can fight Stark. Do you think we would win?" she asked, gazing at her two advisors. Jorah shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps Khaleesi," he started before being cut off. "No more half-truths, Ser Jorah," Daenerys snapped. "No, Khaleesi," he said flatly. "Robb Stark still has armies in the Westerlands and the North. Not to mention, he can still call upon men in the Reach." "Armies can be beaten," Daenerys commented. "But what about commanders?" Jorah replied. "Connington is an above-average leader, but he was outmaneuvered by Eddard Stark, Hoster Tully, and Jon Arryn during the rebellion. While Robert Baratheon was the figurehead of the war, those three men were the brains. In addition, the sellswords captains are used to fighting with Esso Saktact, not Westerosi. Against men like Randall Tarly, Brynden Tully, Jon Royce, and even Robb Stark, who went toe-to-toe with Tywin Lannister and almost won. Against men like that, we have nothing." "Khaleesi," he said bluntly. Daenerys shook her head. "You seem to forget. I have 3 dragons." "True, and in battle the enemy has to account for them, but they are not the beasts Aegon, the Conqueror, had when he took the 7 kingdoms." Sarah Barristan corrected. "They were hundreds of years old. Yours are not." The young monarch sat back in her chair, unable to continue the conversation. All her points had been effortlessly matched by the 2 knights, who were able to give insight on the possible enemy. She shook her head. "Peace is our only path," she sighed. Barristan nodded. "Indeed, but it is also our best path, Your Grace. The Starks are beloved throughout the realm. They are renowned for their honesty and goodness. Doing battle with them, we may look no better than Joffrey." Daenerys' head snapped up at this, glaring at the elderly knight. "I would never kill children," she hissed. When she and her nephew had arrived back in Westeros, they had forced Varys to inform them on everything going on in the capital. The killing of infants on Joffrey's and Cersei's orders had stuck in Daenerys' mind. Barristan held up a hand to stop her. "You misunderstand," he said gently. "Your family has been away for 20 years, and they did not leave a perfect mark on the realm at the end of their rule," he explained. "Joffrey was a tyrant, of that there is no doubt, but Robb Stark is now being seen as a man who will bring stability to the realm. He is the shining young warrior to save the realm for the corrupt lions," he explained easily. "What would you suggest, Ser Barristan? Give up my crown, my throne, my birthright?" the Canaries challenged. The old knight shook his head. "Not at all, Your Grace. All I am saying is that it will take some time to win back the love and trust of the people. I've been around you for a while, Your Grace, and Ser Jorah will agree. It will not take long for the people to see you as the just and kind ruler that you are." Daenerys was caught off guard by Barristan's gentle but sincere words. She had to admit she was expecting to land and be loved. That's how it went in Slaver's Bay. But she knew in her heart that it was because she was there to free them. They wanted her to rule them. In Westeros, no one was enslaved, and she was not wanted. She nodded. "Thank you for your honesty, Ser Barristan," she said softly. The Lord Commander of her Queensguard nodded. "May I speak freely, Your Grace?" Daenerys nodded. "Please. I spent years on Aerys' Kingsguard, then Robert Baratheon's. I watched both men descend to levels in which there was no return. You can be better than both, and I truly believe you will," he said firmly. Daenerys smiled gratefully at the man. "Thank you, Ser Barristan," she nodded to the door. "How goes the training of my Queensguard?" Barristan smiled. "It's going well," he said with a smile. "They are what I expected, but I am working on making them worthy of taking up a white cloak." "I understand the White Cloaks are the best knights in the realm," she said curiously, taking a sip of wine. Barristan's smile wavered. "True," he conceded, "but we are rather short on knights at the moment." Daenerys instantly felt stupid. She knew that the knights Barristan wanted to serve with him were fighting for Robb Stark. "Of course, but under your training, I'm sure they'll quickly become great," she replied easily, changing the topic. "And how are the gold cloaks?" Ser Jorah sat up a little straighter, happy that the topic of his queen's family was now done. "It's tough work," he admitted. "They are untrained and unfit, but with the help of Knights Lord Connington was gracious enough to lend me from the Golden Company. We are doing our best to turn the unit around." "How many do we have trained?" the Daenerys asked. Ser Jorah grimaced. "Maybe 200, he sighed. Years under the usurper and subpar leadership have allowed the men to be lazy. Many were also in the pockets of Baelish before the spider uncovered the man's books. We were able to get rid of many unfaithful men, but the problem with that is that many were experienced watchmen. Have we done anything to fix the problem?
Jorah nodded.
I've swept through Flea Bottom and much of the city, talking to many able-bodied young men. The ranks have swelled, but not to the numbers I've wished. But we are working on the problem. The Daenerys smiled. "I know you'll do your best, Ser Jorah," she complimented. "That'll be all, Sars. Thank you." The two knights stood and bowed to the queen before leaving, each looking far more comfortable than when they had arrived. Daenerys watched them go, waiting till they had closed the door before calling out, "Come out, Lord Varys." A shuffle behind her let her know that her suspicions proved true. The silk-clad eunuch moved forward, bowing to the queen. "I must say, Your Grace, I was wondering if you would alert the two sirs to my presence," he said easily. Daenerys regarded her master of whispers, pouring herself wine. "I don't enjoy being spied on." Varys smiled easily. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I was merely curious. What about my meeting with two of my advisors sparked your curiosity?" "My lord?" she snapped in annoyance. "Normally nothing, Your Grace, but after what was said at the talks with Robb Stark, I was wondering when you would go looking for answers." Varys answered, "And where? Was your curiosity sated?" "Indeed," he said pleasantly. "I am now curious how His Grace will take the news." "Aegon will have to come to terms with it anyways," she said offhandedly. "What's the phrase? Those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it." Daenerys nodded to her. "Close, but true, nevertheless." "Why did you not tell me?" Daenerys asked suddenly. The eunuch pulled a thoughtful face. "I was curious to see what you were like. I had my little birds watching, of course, but reports are not always accurate. I did not think it was smart, if you were like your father, to bring up his condition." "You mean his penchant for burning fathers alive while torturing the sons?" Daenerys deadpanned. Varys gave her a pained smile. "No one left that room without scars, Your Grace," he said. "But as Ser Jorah said, you are not your father."
Daenerys nodded,
gazing at her chalice before asking the question that had been on her mind since her discussion with Barristan and Jorah. Now with her spymaster here, she might as well get an answer now. "Did my brother kidnap the Stark girl?" Varys frowned. "I wish I had an answer for you," he said, sounding annoyed that he wasn't able to give the queen an answer. "Even to this day, I am not able to answer that question." "Surely there must be someone alive who is able to answer that." Daenerys pushed. To what I understand, there are only two people who might be able to answer that question. One is dead, and the other is in the north, as the right-hand man to the White Wolf. Varys answered, "Who is he?" "Lord Howland Reed." "Reed?" Daenerys asked curiously. "I don't believe I've ever heard of such a man." Varys nodded. "Understandable. House Reed of Greywater Watch is a small northern house just south of Motte Cailin. Howland Reed was one of Lord Stark's 6 companions when he went to the Tower of Joy." "Tower of Joy?" Daenerys asked. Varys made a vague gesture. Because the story was so well known to many Westerosi, he momentarily forgot that the young queen did not know the full story. "Forgive me, your grace. The Tower of Joy is where Rhaegar brought Lyanna Stark before the rebellion started. He left her there, guarded by 3 of the Kingsguard, Ser Oswell, when Lord Commander Sekerswald Hightower, and Ser Arthur Dane. Of Stark's 6 companions, only himself and Lord Reed walked away." "I'm surprised, Lord Varys. I thought you knew every secret in the realm." Tyrion said casually, "What prevented you from getting answers from the 2 men?" Varys smiled slightly. "My informants in Winterfell and around the north are not my best. I'll admit, as Ser Barristan said, the Starks are beloved by both commoners and highborn. Lord Stark never spoke about his battle in Dorne. As for Lord Reed, I regret to say that my little birds have never been able to find places to nest in the neck." Daenerys raised an eyebrow. "It's quite all right, Lord Varys. We all have our limits. I was simply curious. Perhaps if I ever get the chance to speak with Lord Reed, I will learn the truth. I am not a man of war, but I do believe Lord Reed will be coming south eventually." Varys said, "My little birds tell me that the war in the north is moving forward swiftly under the White Wolf. There is a chance he and other northern lords might come south, perhaps to celebrate the birth of their new prince." Daenerys raised an eyebrow. "Perhaps a meeting will happen between myself and this Lord Reed, but first we must keep my betrothed from declaring war on the Starks." Varys gave the queen a tired smile. "One problem at a time, my lady. One problem at a time." Eddard v. Ned had always thought that the Dreadfort was a god-awful place to live. The land around it was mostly barren, save for a farmstead or a desolate village that was dotted around. The depressing surroundings only served to make the Black Castle even more sinister looking, and the bloody history of House Bolton was just the finishing feature. The castle radiated darkness and evil. Just a castle that fit the man in front of Ned. Roose hadn't changed much since he and Ned had last spoken. He still had those pale, ghost-colored eyes that usually expressed a cold cunning. Now they expressed nothing cool, calm hatred for Ned and every man and woman behind him. Roose knew that his chance at ruling the North was coming to an end, and now both he and Ned were on the same path that would lead to the same bloody conclusion. Behind the Leech Lord were the rest of his conspirators. Ludder Whitehill, who looked paler than Rose and his eyes fearfully flickered between Ned, Jon, and his former peers. Arnulf Karstark gazed at his nephew Rickard and looked like he wanted to shrink into the nearest hole and hide. Steelshanks, Rose's captain, was at the back of the group, and his face was like a slab of stone. Emotionless. The only person who didn't look a bit fearful was the younger man, big-boned and ugly. He had a half-sneer, half-smirk on his face. Ned could only compare the man to one other, the Mad King. "Lord Stark," Rose said. "Rose," Ned replied. Ned was watching the man closely, and it looked as if Rose barely felt the thinly veiled insult. It seemed he didn't care anymore. Everyone at the meeting knew what the end would be. The only question was, when would it happen? "I will give you one chance," Ned continued. "Lay down your arms, surrender your castle. Your men can go free. The men behind you will have 2 choices, the wall or death." Roose returned the threat with a small smile. "We refuse your generous offer." Ned shrugged. "So be it. We will take the castle with force, and there will no longer be an option when we do. You all will die. You have to take the castle first," the younger man snarled. Ned regarded the man with a cold glare. "I'm taking the castle, boy. Make no mistake about it." "You're Bolton's bastard," Greyjoy growled. "You raided my lands." "Not that there was much on it," the bastard snapped, though the women there put up quite the challenge. The giant lord began to move forward, his hand going to his massive sword. But Jon cut him off, maneuvering his horse in front of the Great Jon, giving him a look. The Lord of Lasshearth glared and growled, but returned to his spot next to Meg and Rickard. Jon urged his mount forward till he was side by side with his father. "Why?" he asked, looking at Rose. "Sara Brynden sent you north to defeat the Ironborn. You could have been a war hero, and now you'll die a traitor." Rose shrugged. "Because Robb Stark was leading you all to ruin, and you blindly follow the pup, because he's a Stark," the man known as the Leech Lord sneered, the hate in his voice obvious. "We all know what happens when Starks go south. They don't usually return." "Robb's not my brother," Ned said. "I didn't take you for a fool, Rose. Though it seems like power can make any man such. Or the promise of power." Jon agreed. "He never had the power he was promised. If you came here to insult me, you waste my time." Rose scowled. "And think carefully about trying to take the castle. Stark, don't forget who's inside. Our blades are sharp." If Rose expected Ned to be angry, then he would be disappointed. Ned knew that Rose would hold his wife against him. He was well aware of the actions Rose would take now that he had no power, and no longer held any sort of morals. Ned would not stoop to his level, but if he thought that Ned would be limited by his own code of honor, then he would be sorely disappointed. House Bolton had risen up against the Starks other times in the past. This would be the last time. "Winter is coming, Rose, but you won't be around to see it," Ned said, turning his mount around and riding away. Lying brave.
Are you worried about Lady Catelyn? Jon asked curiously.
He and his father were alone in the command tent. They had held a brief council of war, with Jon handing over the leadership role to his father, and all that was talked about was preparations for sieging the castle. Rams and ladders needed to be built. Lord Hawker was put in charge of camp defenses, small details that Ned was better suited to issue out. Jon had done well with the siege of Mo Cleland, but he had the advantage of fighting a sick, starving, depleted enemy in the Cranagman. Against an experienced commander like Rose, who had a strong host and plenty of supplies, Ned was better suited to lead the siege, and Jon seemed to have no problem handing over control of the army to his father. "Of course I am," Ned answered. "I've been worried about you all ever since I woke up in Bravos. Of course Sansa and Cata have been at the forefront of my mind as the war has played out." "How do you plan to save her?" Jon asked. Ned glanced out the tent towards the castle in the distance. "There's a plan in place. I just need to give it time to work." "How much time is that?" "A few days, hopefully," Ned sighed. "If it isn't possible, then this siege will be longer than any of us want it to be." "Because we need to starve out the Boltons," Jon said. "That or wait for one of Rose's men to make a mistake. If there were any with Rose that would make one, it would be his bastard," Ned said, unable to shake that sinister, homicidal look that the young man had. "He reminds me of Eddard. The Mad King?" Jon asked before considering the comparison. "Can't say I disagree. Greyjoy mentioned back in Riverrun when we first got word that the Ironborn had attacked, that Rose's bastard had committed some acts." Ned nodded. There were rumors that he had been the one to murder Domeric Bolton, Rose's true-born son. There were also more sadistic rumors around the boy. "I didn't have a chance to look further into the rumors before Robert arrived in Winterfell," Ned sighed. "Perhaps I should have." "What would you have done?" Jon asked suddenly. Ned looked at him curiously. "Pardon?" "If King Robert had found out about who I was," Jon hesitated. "What I am." Ned thought for a moment before answering. "Jon, ever since I rode away from that blasted tower with you in my arms, I have been looking over my shoulder, dreading the moment that Robert learned about how your parents are. As the years went by, I never spoke about your mother or what happened at the tower. Not even when I was battling a fever from the corruption in my leg. The healer for the Company of the Rose said that I mentioned my sister, but not the promise I made to her." Ned crossed his arms, feeling much older than his 37 name days. "I feared every day that Robert would find out and march north to try to harm you. I wasn't sure how he would view you, as Lyanna's son or as Rhaegar's. It pains me to say it, but the one good thing to come out of Robert's death is that you are safer because of it." Jon didn't say anything, allowing Ned to work his way up to an answer. "What I'm saying is that if Robert had marched north with an army at his back to take you, then I would have met him at Moat Kylan with the might of the north," Ned said finally, a slight growl in his throat. "Robert was my brother, in all but blood. But you, Jon, are my blood, and Robert nor anyone else would have taken you from me. Not without walking over my corpse to do it." Ned turned as he heard boots outside the tent, abruptly ending his and Jon's conversation. The flap opened to reveal Howland, his face hidden in the depths of his hood. Behind him were two other men, dressed in a similar fashion. Green cloaks, bronze scale armor, multiple hidden blades coated with some lethal poison. "What have you found?" Ned asked, easily dropping the topic he had just been on. "It's possible." Howland sighed, removing his hood. "It'll be tough, but it's possible." "What do you need?" Ned asked. "A distraction," Howland answered. "A bloody big one. Rose has 4,000 soldiers swarming the place. You need to draw as many as you can out." "How can we do that?" Jon asked. "By throwing all we have at the walls," Ned answered. "Normally, we would attack at multiple different points, spread out the defenders. If we want to draw all defenders to one place, we attack the main gate and the walls around it. That's all we attack." "That'll get a lot of men killed," Jon said. Ned nodded. "It will, but it'll bring every man in the castle to one area. Most likely Rose will use the fact that we are attacking in a confined space against us, and will likely try to bottleneck us. And this is so Howland and his men can get into the castle and save Lady Catelyn," Jon said, more as a statement than a question. Howland nodded. "Exactly. What if we build extra ladders, and hide them behind the castle?" Jon said, pointing to the spot where Howland and his men were most likely to sneak in. "The Company of the Rose has to be at Deepwood Motte by now. If we time our attack right, they could arrive and assault the castle from that spot. It would also provide protection for Cat, as well," Howland added. Ned stared at the map, envisioning the plan in his head. He wasn't sure how fast the company would be able to reach the Dreadfort. Maybe a few days for the cavalry, but 1,000 battle-hardened sellswords might be exactly what Ned needed. As for the ladders, they could easily be hidden in the snow during the night. "Our timing needs to be perfect," Ned said finally. "We also need to be on the lookout for Rose's bastard. He's unpredictable." "Leave that to me, father," Jon said, his tone of voice showing his confidence. "He burned Winterfell. I'll make him pay for that." Ned searched for any traces of doubt in his son's eyes, but found none. Jon meant what he said. He would deal with whatever the bastard threw at the Northern Army, and he wouldn't allow it to affect the army in any way. "Very well," Ned said finally. "You'll have 1,000 horse. Take Ian Hawker as your second." Jon bowed slightly and left, leaving Howland and Ned alone. The Lord of Greywater Watch turned to his men, who simply nodded and left as well. The Cranogmen were completely loyal to the wiry lord, and nearly as deadly. Many in the north and much of Westeros called them bog devils, and they were closer to the truth than they thought. The warriors of the Neck were perhaps the deadliest Ned had under his command. Dead shots with bows, skilled with knives and poisons, and had an uncanny ability to always take advantage of the surrounding landscape. They were able to adapt and respond to any scenario in mere moments. They weren't great frontline fighters, but they were skilled in ways that other men simply weren't. That's what made them invaluable. "You were right," Ned said quietly, gazing out the tent at the castle. "I should have told Jon long ago." Howland shrugged. "He knows now. That's all that matters." The two men stood in silence for a while, before Ned glanced at his longtime friend. "When did you tell the Maester at Castle Black?" "When you told me that the boy wanted to join the Night's Watch," Howland answered. "If you're wondering if I knew about the Valyrian steel sword that he gave Jon, I didn't, not until I saw it on him, when I stopped him and his friend of the King's Road." "It's with Robb now," Ned said. "I'll admit, it makes me feel a little better, knowing that two of my sons have swords capable of cutting through steel like knives through parchment. And from what I've heard, they know how to wield them." Howland grunted. "Soon, Ned, you'll be reunited with Cat, and then you can ride south and see Robb. Your family will be together again soon." "You sound sure of that," Ned said, gazing at his friend, who met his gaze unwaveringly. "Ned, if I can't get Cat out of there, I'm gonna die trying," Howland said with a completely straight face. "That you can be sure of." "Robb wet seconds X. Lord Stark," Daenerys greeted as she and her advisors entered the tent, flanked by a dozen Unsullied. Sarah Brynden had told Robb a little about the slave soldiers from Astapor in Slaver's Bay. They were eunuch soldiers who were said to feel no pain, nor fear. They were made famous after the fall of Valyria, when a Dothraki horde, thousands strong, surged into the free cities. Puhor had apparently hired 2 companies of sellswords and had a city guard of well-armed and armored cavalry. They had hired 3,000 Unsullied as an afterthought. Those 3,000 had killed 12,000 Unsullied, saving the city. Now Unsullied were bought by wealthy merchants and princes all throughout Essos. They were supposedly the perfect guards, disciplined and deadly. "My lady," Robb greeted. Standing up, he nodded to the servants who stood off to the side. "Bread and salt." The visiting group took the proffered food before taking their seats. The table in front of them bore ample food and wine, but Robb doubted that it would be eaten. The Targaryen queen had brought the hand of the King Jon Connington, and Sarah Barristan was once again at her side. The last member was a bit of a surprise, but Prince Doran had finally made an appearance. Robb had brought an equal number of people. Marjorie, of course, sat at his right hand. Her grandmother was on her right, and Lord Forrester sat on Robb's left. The Northern Lord had become something of a favorite for the Northern King ever since the battle at High Heart. His calm, collected demeanor reminded Robb slightly of his father. When Robb took his seat, the meeting started. "I hope Lady Sansa's doing well," Daenerys started kindly. "She seemed a little shaken up when we returned her to you." Robb nodded. "My sister is well, thank you." That was a lie, but Robb didn't want to admit how Sansa was truly doing. He had spent most of the night with his sister weeping on his shoulder as she spouted stories of how Cersei and Joffrey had abused her. Joffrey had only had her physically assaulted once, which the Impede had thankfully put a stop to, but that didn't stop the blonde prat and his bitch of a mother from verbally assaulting Sansa. Sansa was currently being kept company by Harold Arryn and guarded by Daisy Mormont. She and Marjorie would be introduced tonight, when the three of them and Lady Olenna had dinner. "Lord Stark, we are your guests. I would like you to begin the proceedings," Daenerys said. "Thank you, my lady," Robb said with a smile. "I have taken the time to speak with my sister, and she has requested that a couple of unsung heroes who protected her be spared and allowed to join my camp." Daenerys raised an eyebrow. "And who might those be?" "The Impted Tyrion Lannister is the first," Robb answered. "I believe he also comes with a young boy named Hod and a sellsword named Bronn," he added, consulting the notes he kept on hand, "as well as the hound, Sandor Clegane." "Anyone else?" Daenerys asked. "We would also ask that Tommen Baratheon be allowed out of the city and be brought under our protection." Marjorie added, "We understand that Marcella Waters is in the Dornish camp, and so we lay no claim on her. So long as she is safe." "She is," Doran confirmed. "May I ask what your intention for the boy is?" Daenerys asked. "He is, after all, your enemy." "Is he?" Robb asked, curiously. "My fight was with his older brother and mother. Tommen was, and still is, a boy. Because of his brother's conduct, I fear that there might be those in the city who wish to see him dead, or worse, on the throne." Connington leaned closer to the Targaryen queen and whispered something to her. Daenerys looked at the man, who nodded gravely. The girl sighed before looking back at Robb. "You are asking me to give up 5 of my prisoners," Daenerys said finally. "You understand that I must receive compensation. I have the Mountain and Lorch in chains and ready to be handed over," Robb said instantly, watching Prince Doran in the corner of his eye perk up in seat as the men were mentioned. "I am well aware of their crimes, and given the grudge House Martell and House Targaryen has against them, I believe that they are fair compensation." "We want the Kingslayer as well," Connington said. Robb shook his head. "He is not on the table, my lord. He will face northern justice. But he killed... If you are about to say that he deserves to be handed over to House Targaryen because he killed the Mad King, then you make our case for us." Lady Olenna cackled. "Come now, my lord. Arius was king, but he was known as the Mad King. If the Kingslayer didn't do it, I assure you that others would have." Connington glared at the old woman, but held his tongue. He seemed to know the Queen of Thorns' reputation and wisely decided not to engage the woman anymore. He would end up embarrassing himself. "You ask for much, my lord," Daenerys said. "My lady, you still have Cersei and Joffrey." Marjorie pointed out, "Your nephew, I believe, was the one who slew Tywin Lannister. None of whom we have asked for played any significant role, if any role at all, in the downfall of your family. The 2 men you are receiving, on the other hand, committed atrocious acts that not even the reasoning of war can fix." Lord Forrester added. "What do you say, my lady?" Robb said, leaning back in his chair. "Do we have a deal?" Line break. Word from the Reach. Robb said. sounding a little confused. "It's from Old Town." "I was beginning to wonder," Marjorie said, easing herself into her chaise. Her grandmother had ordered one brought from High Garden. It was an elongated, blush type of chair that Marjorie was beginning to love more and more as the pregnancy progressed. Robb quickly read the message, his confusion turning to dread. It was from Lord Leighton Hightower, and it contained many important facts, including the assaults on the Citadel, the burning of the Starry Septon, and the capture of many Ironborn ships and nobles. But what caught Robb's gaze was the last line. "Lord Mace Tyrell died fighting Theon Greyjoy. He was able to injure the man before dying. Sir John Fossaway finished him off with Mace's sword." "What?" Marjorie asked, sitting up slightly. Robb didn't answer. "Sepulon?" "Yes, Your Grace. Please send for Sir Garland, Sir Loras, and Lady Olenna. Tell them that it is urgent," Robb ordered. "Robb, what is it?" Marjorie asked again, now looking worried. Robb shook his head. "Trust me, we need to wait for the others," he said, pulling up a chair next to his wife and taking her hand. It took a few minutes for the 3 other towers to assemble in Robb's and Marjorie's quarters. Loras had been the first to arrive, while Olenna had been escorted in by Garland. "Robb, what is the matter?" Garland asked. Robb glanced at Marjorie before looking back at the knight. "As you know, the Ironborn took Old Town a few weeks ago. I sent Lord Mace and his host to take the city back. He did so, but at the cost of his own life." Robb felt Marjorie's hand tighten on his, tears instantly springing to her eyes. "Robb, please tell me you're joking." Robb put both hands over hers. "I wish I was Marjorie," he nodded to the letter. He left on the table. "I received that letter from Lord Leighton. When the Ironborn surged out of the city, they were easily trapped and slaughtered. Theon Greyjoy was one of the last raiders left. Lord Mace fought him by himself, and died. At least before died, he injured Theon enough to where he was finished off by Sir John Fossaway." Loras rushed across the room and snatched the letter of the table, reading it quickly. Whereas Marjorie had tears in her eyes, Loras was completely red in the face and had murder in his eyes. He practically threw the letter at Garland when he was done reading it. "I have to go," he said. "Where?" Olenna snapped. "To the Iron Island." Loras answered, "To avenge my father." "Lord Tyrell is already working on that," Robb said. "All that's left is Lord Sport and Pike. The Ironborn are all but defeated." "But—" Loras began. "Loras, let it go," Garland said gently as he handed the letter to his grandmother. "Father died a hero. He fought a very dangerous and highly skilled warrior, and he saved a lot of other men. He died with honor. Let him have that." "My foolish boy," Olenna whispered. "My brave, stupid boy. His body is being sent back to High Garden, where Lady Allery and Wellis can say their farewells," Robb said. "Wellis will probably make his way here after Father's body reaches High Garden," Garland said sadly. "He'll want to pledge loyalty to you, Robb, as the new Lord of High Garden. He'll also be able to help with the negotiations." Olenna added. "Will your mother be all right?" Robb asked. "She's a strong woman. She'll manage," Olenna answered. "Mace was very lucky he convinced her to marry him." "I am sorry that I had to break this news to you all," Robb said. "It had to be done," Garland sighed. "I'd glad I heard it from you, rather than learning about it later." Loras simply nodded. His anger had faded to sadness, and now he pouted on the side, trying to hide his tears. He had always been his father's favorite. According to both Margie and Garland, he was dealing with powerful feelings. But so were Margie and Garland. He was their father. It's never easy to lose someone like that. Robb knew from personal experience. "Please, let me know if you need anything at all," Robb continued. Garland nodded and looked at Loras, motioning that they all should leave. The 3 Tyrells bowed to Robb before leaving, their sadness palpable. "Do you need anything?" Robb asked quietly, turning to his wife. Marga shook her head slightly, leaning on Robb's shoulder. The 2 young royals stayed like that for a moment. It reminded Robb so much of when he and Jon had mourned their father together. Robb had been leaving the castle, ready to hack at the first tree he saw when Jon had caught him, knowing what he was about to do. Instead, he brought Robb back inside, and the 2 brothers drank ale and spoke in hushed tones about no particular topic. At first it had been about their father, but as they got more drunk, they began to swap stories from their childhoods. It had been a good way for both brothers to heal together. They won't get to meet him, Margaery whispered, her tears sliding silently off her cheeks and onto Robb's sleeve. Our child won't get to meet my father. Robb nodded, not having any words to say in reply. How? Margaery said, at a loss for words, something she very rarely was. Somehow, Robb knew what she was trying to say. It'll be up to you and your brothers to tell our son about him. Robb said, not sure why he had said son. It just sounded right. He'll hear stories of how the great Mace Tyrell fought Theon Greyjoy single-handedly, a man 8 feet tall and as strong as a mammoth. He'll hear how, even though his grandfather didn't kill the man, he saved dozens of lives when he mortally injured the fearsome raider. How do you know he'll be Margaery asked. Robb shrugged gently. Just a feeling. I've learned to trust those. And when he arrives, we'll make sure he knows all about his grandfather Mace Tyrell. A very brave man. Asha the second. Greyjoy, a shout came from beyond the main gate. Asha nodded to her men as she made her way to the top of the battlements, looking completely at ease even though she was the furthest thing from it. The man was burly and stout, with fiery red hair and a bushy beard. He wore leather and steel plate armor, his tabard bearing the iron fist of House Glover. Asha knew in an instant that she was looking at Galbert Glover, the master of Deepwood Motte. He was surrounded by what looked like a group of sellswords, though they held themselves better than such. Many of them, in fact, wore tabards bearing the sigils of other northern houses. Asha recognized Umbers, Manderleys, and Hawkers. One man even wore the sigil of House Stark. What do you want? Asha asked. Lay down your arms and come out. Glover shouted, surrender and I'll let you live. And if we don't, one of Asha's men called fiercely. Then I'll make sure each and every one of you is dead. Galbard answered. Make no mistake, the only good Ironborn is a dead one. Asha crossed her arms, glaring at the master of Deepwood Motte. The offer wasn't bad, but she would be damned if both of her father's children disgraced themselves in the north. She made up her mind then and there that she would fight. She and her men had paid the iron price for the castle, and they would defend it with that same iron. Come and take it then, Asha shouted. We'll stay right here. The men around her cheered and banged their weapons against their shields. Like her, none of them wanted to disgrace themselves by surrendering to the enemy. The Ironborn were raiders. They took what they wanted, and they fought like hell if anyone tried to take it back. Glover shrugged and turned back, he and his companions riding away. Asha came down from the battlements, coming face to face with her uncle. It seems we have a fight coming. Her uncle frowned, but nodded. She didn't need to read his mind to know his thoughts. He had always been a cautious man, but he also knew who his niece was, and was going to follow her regardless of his own opinions. So it seems, Roderick grunted. Kuren, Asha barked. Follow me. Coral the maid, as many Ironborn knew him on account of his beardless face and slightly feminine features, was one of Asha's best warriors. He, like all of Asha's crew, was completely devoted to her. Captain, Coral said, falling in behind Asha and her uncle. The three warriors made their way into the keep and soon found themselves outside the Lord's chamber, where Asha has been keeping Lady Sepel Glover, wife of Robert Glover, Lord Glover's brother, and her children, along with Lawrence Snow, the bastard of Hornwood. When they had taken the castle, Asha had found one of her men attempting to rape the noblewoman. In response, Asha had castrated the man in front of all her warriors before casting him off. It was a message that had only needed to be sent once. Nobody would touch Sepel Glover. Captain, Coral asked, you're to stand guard over Lady Sepel and her men, Asha ordered. No disrespect, but I'm your best sword. Coral argued, you need me out there. I need you here in case anyone tries to buy their freedom with the woman. Asha explained, if I'm going to give my life fighting the Northerners, I want my men going down with me. We're a crew. We sail together. We fight together. I'll make damn sure we die together. Coral nodded slowly. Fine. I'll guard the damn woman. Asha patted his face. I always knew you were more than just a pretty face. Coral smiled slightly, unable to stay mad at his captain for long. I think you've known for a while, Captain. Asha smacked the young man in the back of the head before walking off, her uncle her silent shadow. When they reached the solar, her uncle finally broke his silence. You know this is a horrible idea, he said. You should have surrendered. And what message would that have sent to my men? Asha countered, pouring herself a cup of wine in preparation for the argument that was about to take place. That you care more about their lives than your foolish pride. Roderick answered, I told you back before you left for the Dreadfort, the Iron Islands need you alive. The Iron Islands aren't mine, Asha scoffed. My father is still alive. Her uncle shook her head. You know we can't win this war, Asha. Robb Stark has too many bloody men, and once he's done with the Lannisters, he's going to turn on us. Roderick hissed. What do you think he's going to do to Balon when he gets his hands on him? Northerners are very fucking fond of executions. Who will the Iron Islands fall to? The Theon Greyjoy, that bull who has seaweed for brains, or that damn fanatic Fair? You are who the Iron Islands need to lead them, and you can't do that if your head is on a pike outside a castle. So you've already given up, have you? Asha snarled, slamming her cup back down on the table and splashing wine. Do you know who we're fighting? Roderick growled. Those aren't some frozen northers. That's the Company of the Rose, one of strongest sellsword companies in Essos. Do you know how many men they have? Fucking 1,000. Asha felt the blood drain from her face. She had thought that she was facing a few hundred northerners. She knew that the northern army coming north couldn't afford to send thousands of men after her. Not with the Boltons in the east. Now her uncle was pointing out just how stupid it had been for her to give up the chance to surrender peacefully. We have no choice now, Asha said quietly. You know as well as I that they would have executed both of us if we had surrendered. I'd much rather go out with a weapon in my hand. Roderick sighed and crossed his arms. Very well, Asha. We'll do this your way. Line break. They came at dusk, just as the sun was setting. Coming up the main path that led to the castle was a ram, which looked to be hastily constructed. Spreading out to the east and west of the castle were groups of men jogging with ladders. Asha was able to see 8 ladders in total, with a large column of men following each. All around her, archers and raiders ran to their positions. In the 2 towers that protected the main gate, archers rained arrows down on the attackers. Unfortunately, Asha's archers were spread thin along the wall. She had given command of the first wall to her uncle, the only man she trusted to pull her forces back to the second line of defense, where she was. Earl Harlaw, one of her most experienced raiders, was in command at the last line of defense, which was the short palisade that protected the castle. He had roughly 50 men with him. Asha watched grimly as the ram reached the first gate and began battering it down. Her uncle, armored in a combination of leather, chainmail, and steel plate, could be clearly seen above the gatehouse. He was surrounded by his captains, many of whom were running off. Asha continued to watch as archers left the walls and took up positions higher on the hill, their spots filled with small pockets of ironborn warriors. In front of the gate, Asha recognized Rolf the dwarf, an ironic name given his tremendous height, rallying his fellow raiders. With the light fading away, the enemy showed their positions with torches. For the first time, Asha saw just how diminutive her force was compared to the attacking army. There were indeed thousands of them, and they were using their numbers to the fullest advantage. Her uncle's men, 300 ironborn raiders, which included every archer Asha had, were spread out across the wall, and for every warrior she had down there, the enemy had a dozen more. It's a fine night to die. Raggan Rustbeard grunted. Asha's second, the red-bearded raider, leaned on the wall next to his captain. Asha glanced up at the sky and couldn't help but agree. There had been a light dusting of snow during the day, but the night was cloudless with a full moon and stars shining in the heavens. It was still cold, obviously, but it was a beautiful night nonetheless. Giving up already? Asha asked quietly. Regan allowed a slight smile to touch his craggy features. Not at all, Captain. Just admiring the view. Asha chuckled and turned her attention back to the fight. The main gate was nearly broken through. Rolf and others had formed a shield wall, supported by a dozen archers. Still, they looked pitifully small to provide any sort of defense. For how well she and her uncle had prepared the defenses, the enemy were just as cunning. The moment the ram broke through the gate, the enemy swarmed up the walls, timing their attack all at the same moment. Asha had just a second to admire the sellsword's discipline, before she saw her men be mobbed by what seemed like hundreds of warriors. Uncle Roderick's defenses lasted a few minutes before horns were blown, and the raiders began to retreat. Surprisingly, the enemy didn't give chase. Instead, their archers took command of the palisade as the infantry formed up below it. Asha, Roderick grunted, walking up to his niece. His armor was splattered with blood and his blade was colored red, but for the most part, her uncle looked unharmed. "We have to retreat." "What do you mean?" Asha asked. "We don't have the men to hold them," Roderick said, taking off his helm and wiping the sweat from his brow. "If we hold the wall outside the castle, we can suppress their numbers for a little longer. But this is not a battle we can win. We held for barely a minute before we had to retreat." Asha cursed quietly, looking out at the enemy. It dawned on her what they were doing. The ram was being brought through the wreckage of the main gate, and ladders were being hauled over the ramparts. They were going to use the same assault tactic on the second gate that they had just used on the first. "Fine," Asha said. "Ragun, board up the second gate then, get everyone back to the main keep. We're going to fall back to the third wall." The raider nodded and began to bellow orders. Soon, those who weren't staying to fortify the gate were grabbing anything that would be useful to repel the enemy, and began to climb up towards the final defense. "Asha, we can end this fight right now," Roderick urged quietly. "Bring Septon and let her children out. We can hand them over and surrender." Asha glanced at her uncle before following her men up the hill. She knew her uncle was right, but she didn't want to give up till her back was well and truly to the wall. When she reached Harlaw's position, her remaining archers were already on the walls, surrounded by men wielding spears and harpoons. Around the wall were piles of rocks and others projectiles that could be hurled at the enemy. Asha and her uncle walked past them all and made their way into the castle. There was a commotion happening down the hall where the lord's chambers were, and Asha's first thoughts went to Sybil Glover. "Uncle," Asha growled, grabbing her throwing axes and rushing towards the room. Crail had his longsword drawn, surrounded by no less than 7 men. The 8th man was on the floor, his neck ripped open and spilling blood. "Let us through," one raider growled. "We're going to die. Might as well have some fun while we can." "You'll do no such thing," Asha barked, striding up to the group. "Lady Sybil will not be touched." The raider hesitated for a second before spitting at Asha's boots. "Screw you, bitch. When we're done with the cunt inside, we'll have yours as well." Her uncle drew his sword. "Try it, Lars, and you'll be the first to die." Everything happened in a matter of moments. Lars charged her uncle, followed by one of his friends, while 2 rushed Asha. It had been 3, but Coral had put his sword through the back of one before being attacked by the final 2 raiders. The fight had been short and bloody, ending when Uncle Roderick had cut off one of Lair's hands before shoving his blade through the man's throat. It was then that Asha noticed that they were no longer alone. Standing at one end of the hall was Lord Glover, surrounded by dozens of fighters. Asha didn't know how they had gotten into the castle, but it didn't matter now. She threw down her axes, surprising both her uncle and Coral. Both men soon followed her example. "Lord Glover, we surrender," she said bitterly. She opened the door, catching sight of the terrified woman who was clutching 3 children close to her. Lady Sybil and her children are unharmed. The Lord of Deepwood Motte marched up to her, flanked by the man wearing the Stark tabard. The men behind him rushed off, presumably to finish the fight. Glover glanced inside the room before looking at Asha. "I let you live because you protected my family," he rumbled. "You and the 2 men with you. The others will be put to the sword." Asha could only nod, feeling the full weight of their deaths on her shoulders. Glover pushed past her and entered the room, leaving the other man behind, who was gazing at Asha, was a small amount of curiosity. Asha glared back at him. "What?" she snapped. "At the gate, I knew we were facing the daughter of Balon Greyjoy," he mused. "Maybe you're smarter than I thought." "Fuck you," Asha responded. The man simply shrugged and leaned against the wall, a hand resting easily on the hilt of his sword. "You may be smarter than your father, girl, but you're still Ironborn, and that'll get you killed if you're not careful." "Fuck you," Asha said again, though still able to hear the soft grunt of agreement from her uncle. Robb the Clon of Seven. As he rode through the streets of King's Landing, he couldn't help but be disappointed by all that he saw. Beggars and filth covered either side of the road. Many people Robb passed looked closer to skeletons than people, their pleading, sorrowful eyes burning holes in the northern king's heart. He rode at the head of his retinue of his best warriors that surrounded the carriage that held his queen and her grandmother. Brienne was left in command of the men while Daisy and Smalchin rode at Robb's back, their hands on their weapons at all times. They were under no delusions of safety. Not when they were entering the proverbial dragon's lair. Robb brought his horse to a stop next to a small child, whose face was covered with dirt and wore nothing but a burlap sack that hung off of his bony frame. He looked up at Robb with large, begging eyes. "Please, my lord, I'm so hungry," he said quietly. Robb fished out 2 gold dragons, handing them to the kid, nodding towards another group of hungry-looking children. "How about you and your friends go get something to eat?" The kid nodded quickly and ran off, followed by 6 others. Robb watched them go, his face a mixture of sorrow and anger. He hated that he had been neglectful of the people of the city. They weren't his people, but he had the ability to help them. All he needed was the approval of the Targaryens. And if they were smart, they would accept his help. Ser Barristan rode out and joined them the closer they got to the Red Keep. The old knight had become the bridge between the Starks and Targaryens, which was fine with Robb. The man was renowned for his honor and honesty, which Robb preferred to deal with over a politician. "My lord," Ser Barristan greeted, falling in line next to Robb. "Thank you for agreeing to come to the trial." "My men were the ones who captured them," Robb answered. "It's only right that they see proper justice dispensed." "Indeed, my lord," Barristan said. "Both men are scheduled to be executed in no less than half an hour." "Execution?" Robb asked, slightly surprised that neither had asked for trial by combat. Barristan shifted slightly in his saddle as they rode through the gate and into the castle courtyard. King Aegon stripped both men of their knighthoods. Robb shook his head. "They are nobles. Sire, forgive me, but the only man who has a right to strip them of anything is myself. I control the Westerlands." "So you've said," Aegon drawled, striding out of the keep, followed by 2 white-cloaked warriors. "You've stripped Clegane and Lorch of their knighthood," Robb said, frowning. "Not only have you no right to do so, they are still nobles nonetheless. They are still expected to be tried fairly." "I didn't expect you to care, Stark." Aegon shrugged. "They're rapists and murderers. They are the scum of the earth, and you would see them tried fairly." "They are nobles, and in Westeros, they are tried fairly," Robb pressed. "Please, your grace, my lord, let us go inside and discuss this privately," Ser Barristan said. Robb glared at Aegon, but nodded, dismounting before walking over to the carriage and helping his wife. Aegon simply shrugged and walked back inside. In a moment, Robb's retinue surrounded him as their horses and carriage were taken care of by stable hands and servants. "What was that about?" Marguerite asked. Robb glanced at her and her grandmother, who walked behind them on Garland's arm. "The Mountain and Lorch were tried unfairly." "How do you mean?" Marguerite asked. "Aegon stripped them of their knighthood and condemned them to death." Robb explained, "I despise the men as much as anyone else, but they are still nobles. If the Targaryens want to rule in Westeros, then they better know the laws." "Quite right, your grace," Olenna said, nodding approvingly. Bran coughed quietly, warning Robb that someone was approaching. Ser Barristan bowed as Daenerys walked up to the group, a great mountain and brawn and blubber behind her. The man's tan skin was hatch-marked with numerous scars, and he was dressed oddly. He wore baggy pants tied at the waist with a golden yellow sash and a ridiculously tiny vest studded with iron. At his side was an Arakan, and he held a small plate-sized shield in his other hand. "My lady," Robb said, nodding to the Targaryen queen. "Thank you for arriving, my lord," Daenerys said with a smile. "The executions should happen shortly." "I'd rather they don't happen at all, my lady," Robb said, surprising the woman. "Perhaps there is a place we can speak." Daenerys nodded and motioned for the group to follow. They easily made their way to a small meeting room, where Ser Barristan and the other man took up positions on either side of the door. Robb glanced at his men, who got the message, and lined the wall across from the door. Only Robb, Margaery, Garland, and Olenna followed Daenerys inside the room, with Garland closing the door behind them. "What's the problem?" Daenerys asked, crossing her arms. "Aegon stripped Lorch and Clegane of their knighthoods. Something he had no right to do," Robb started, keeping his voice calm and conversational. "Second, regardless of their knighthoods, They are still nobles and are entitled to trials in front of their peers. Condemning them without trial and ordering their execution is murder, not justice. They were tried, my lord. Daenerys argued. What did this trial look like, my lady? Olenna asked from behind Robb. Were they marched in front of you, bound in chains, where their crimes were read out and their deaths sentenced while they stood there silently? Daenerys didn't answer, a slight redness coming to her cheeks. That is what had happened, and Robb could see it in her eyes that she had just been exposed by the old woman. Daenerys sighed. They are murderers and rapists. And are the scum of the earth, as your nephew puts it, Robb said, cutting her off. I will not argue that they should die, but there are laws in place, my lady, that all Westerosi nobles, especially Westerosi kings and queens, are expected to follow. Daenerys shook her head. What would you have me do? Call off their execution? Exactly that, Robb said. If you go through with this execution, you send a clear message to all other nobles who are pledged to you, that you do not care for Westerosi law and that you have the power to condemn men to death at will. Robb hesitated before adding, after the actions taken by your father, I do not have to tell you what reputation you will give yourself because of their deaths. Surely their crimes show that they are worthy of execution. Daenerys said, That is true, my lady, but because they are nobles means that they must be tried fairly. Margaery said, They are terrible men who have committed heinous crimes, my lady, but there are certain formalities that must be observed. Rest assured they will be found guilty, and they will die. Robb couldn't help but agree. There was no doubt that both men would call for a trial by combat, but Robb doubted that either would walk away alive. Larch was more renowned for his cruelty and brutality than his skill with a blade. The Mountain, on the other hand, would have made a daunting challenge if not for the fact that he was partially crippled from where Robb had stabbed him in the back of the knee. The wound was still healing, and although Robb had a maester working on it while the Mountain was his prisoner, it would have to be heavily braced still if Gregor Clegane wished to fight for his life. And if they wish for a trial by combat? Daenerys asked, clearly knowledgeable about that option. Robb shrugged. Both parties have numerous warriors who would be more than willing to fight. Daenerys thought for a moment before nodding. Very well. I will speak to my nephew and a trial shall be put together in an hour's time. Would you be willing to stand as one of the judges, my lord? Robb nodded. I will. Blind break. True to her word, Daenerys had set up the throne room so that the trial could be held. The crowd was a little thin, since the Targaryens had dispersed many of the Lannister courtiers, but it was still a reasonably sized crowd that kept to the sides of the vast room, leaving the center open. 3 chairs had been placed at the steps leading up to the Iron Throne. Robb waited in front of us as the crowd came in, staring up at the monstrous chair. Robb had expected it to be more. A massive construction of melted swords. Instead, it was a throne of iron set on top of a stone dais. Robb wondered briefly that a highly skilled group of smiths could reproduce a throne just like it, given time and materials. Impressive. No? Prince Oberyn said, sauntering up to Robb. The Northern King shrugged. I guess. Oberyn laughed. You seem unimpressed. Robb smiled slightly. Would you believe me if I said that I expected more? Depends on your definition of more. Oberyn replied. A mountain of molten swords, with a seat at the top. Robb explained. A throne that looked like it had been forged by dragonfire. Ah, I see. Oberyn mused. Still, you cannot deny that it is a throne fit for a king. I would argue that a crown nor a throne can make a king, Robb said. If anyone sat on the throne in Sunspear, would you call him a Prince of Dorne? Oberyn thought for a moment before shaking his head. I see your point. Robb glanced at where Aegon and Connington entered. Prince Oberyn, while I have you here, I wish to let you know that, if my family has angered you in any way, I wish to apologize. Oberyn gave the Northman a confused look. I assume you're talking about the rebellion. Robb nodded. Perhaps we can talk about this another time, Oberyn said before turning to his king. Nephew, he said with a bow. Aegon smiled at the Dornishman. Uncle. Oberyn nodded to Robb and Connington before leaving to stand with his brother. On Robb's right, off on the other side of the throne room, was the Targaryen's small council, whereas Robb's retinue was off to his left. He gave Margaery a smile as he took his seat. Connington's chair was in the middle of him, and Aegon, but remained standing. Silence, Connington ordered, bringing the room to order. Bring in the prisoners. In the silence, the door's opening created a booming echo that was soon replaced with the sound of jangling chains, marching steps, and shuffles. Unsullied soldiers strode in. Escorting the two men, Larch looked defiant, his face comically red as he strained against his bonds. The mountain remained stoic, like he was made of stone, as he shuffled forward. Every inch of the man seemed to be covered in chains, from his feet to his hands to his shoulders. When the two men were in the center of the room, the Unsullied spread out and took up positions around the men. Conton then continued. Armory Lorch Gregor Clegane, you stand charged of rape and murder. How do you plead? Not guilty, Lorch snarled. The mountain remained silent, not appearing as if he was even listening. Aegon snorted as his hand took his seat. Your crimes are well documented. Proof, Lorch countered. Aegon seemed a little taken back, like he hadn't expected the answer. What proof do we need? As I said, your crimes are well documented. Proof, Lorch repeated, seeing the other king's confusion and taking advantage of it. Who here can say that me or Secrecker were there? There is someone, Robb said, leaning forward in his seat. Connington, trying his best not to look relieved, nodded. Call him forward. Lord Gregor Forrester, Robb called, the Northern Lord instantly stepping forward. Forrester had originally stayed back at camp, but as a precaution, Margaery had sent for the man in case there was a need to prove the two men's crimes. State your name and title, Connington ordered.
I am Gregor Forrester, Lord of Ironrath in the North.
Lord Gregor answered, putting his hands behind his back. You can prove that these men committed the crimes they are accused of, Aegon asked, of raping and murdering my mother Elia Martell, and my sister Rhaenys. Lord Forrester nodded. I was there in the throne room when Tywin Lannister presented the bodies to Robert Baratheon, admitting that he had sent these two men to kill them. Aegon sat back, like there was nothing more to say. Combat! Clegane grunted, speaking for the first time. Aegon frowned. What did the beast say? Robb sighed quietly. I believe he is demanding a trial by combat. I too demand a trial by combat. Lorch added. Robb spoke up before Aegon could. That is your right, as a noble of the realm. You will fight as your own champion, Aegon added. Lorch nodded, already knowing that he was going to fight. Gregor nodded as well. Who will fight for the crown? Connington asked. Almost immediately, multiple warriors stepped forward. Brienne, Galen, Loras, and Balon Swan from Robb's group, along with numerous sellswords from the Targaryen side. Aegon was in deep discussion with Connington, looking like he was pleading with the older man about something, when a voice rang out from the crowd. Your Grace, I will fight both men. Oberyn Martell said, striding forward. I am very interested in making sure that they pay for their crimes. Elia was my sister. She was my mother, Aegon argued. Indeed, but you are a king. I, on the other hand, am expendable, Oberyn replied easily. I see no issue, Prince Oberyn, only that it seems unwise to have you fight both men, Robb said, cutting off the argument so that Aegon could save a little face in front of his court. It wouldn't serve to have him argue with his family in front of them. Do you doubt my skill? Oberyn asked. Not at all, but if you were to be injured fighting one, then you would be unable to fight the other fairly. Robb explained. Choose one, and another champion shall fight the other. Oberyn shrugged, turning to face the two warriors. I want the mountain, he declared with a clear, firm voice. Very well, Aegon said. My lord, perhaps a warrior from my camp would make a suitable opponent for Lorch, Robb offered. Who do you have in mind? Aegon asked. Robb glanced over at his retinue. Ser Loras stepped forward. Robb's good brothers stepped forward, kneeling. Are you willing to fight Emery Lorch? Robb asked, although already knowing the answer. I am, Loras answered, without hesitation. Robb glanced at Aegon. Ser Loras is skilled with both sword and lance, my lord, simply asked Ser Barristan. Both Aegon and Connington looked over at the old knight, who simply nodded. That was enough for them. Very well, Connington said. Both duels shall happen the day after tomorrow. Lorch's shall happen an hour before midday, and Clegane's an hour after. This trial is over. Line break. I do not appreciate you offering my brother to that animal. Margaery scowled as Robb rode next to the window in her carriage. I do not fear Amory Lorch, Loras said, riding next to Robb. I will cut him down with ease, sister. Perhaps, but even still, train with Brienne and Garlan, Robb said, looking at the young knights. I understand that you're confident, but it has been some time since you've been in a fight to the death. I want you at your best. Loras nodded. As you wish, and thank you, Loras added quietly before riding off.
We have other fighters. Margaery grumbled.
Robb smiled softly. That is true, but you know your brother. This will give him the glory he craves, and we both know that Lorik is no match for him. Let him have this. He does not have the task of fighting the mountain.
Margaery could only nod,
Accepting Robb's explanation. I for one praise you for how you handled yourself, Olenna said, working on her needlework as she spoke. That Targaryen boy seems to have little to no control over his mouth. He didn't even have an answer when Lorch asked for proof. Thank the gods you and my granddaughter saved him from embarrassment. Sending for Lord Forrester was smart. He's the only reservation I have about this alliance. Robb admitted, I can work with Lady Daenerys, but Aegon worries me. He seems eager for war, because he's thinking with his sword arm. Olenna laughed. The girl wants to be loved, that much is clear. She is worried about looking like her father, and rightfully so. The boy, he wants to model himself after the Conqueror, yet he lacks what his namesake did, dragons. If she can keep him in line, then all will be fine, Robb said. I hope so as well, Olenna said. The Targaryens cannot be trusted. I don't trust them, Robb said softly, but like I said, I would like to attempt peace before throwing my men into more war, especially since winter is coming. Olenna gave the Northern King an amused smile. Isn't it always? Amusing, my lady, but I'm afraid that it actually is this time, Robb sighed, and we must prepare. Robb and Secton. The duels were held in a small arena in the Red Keep. When Robb and Margaery entered, they expected to find a crowd thick with commoners and nobles alike, but it was mainly sellswords and courtiers. It was then that Robb realized that the Targaryens didn't want to make the duels a spectacle, which made sense. They saw Lorch and Clegane as no more than thugs and deserved no fame for their deaths. Robb was escorted through the castle by Unsullied, but had his own retainers following him as well. Brienne, of course, was with him, as was Garlan, Loras, and Loras' squire. The fifth and final member was a surprise that Robb had pulled on them all. Sandor Clegane was taller than Brienne of Tarth, which was not the scariest fact about the man. Garbed in plain soot-black armor with a long sword at his side, it was his face that drew all the attention. His long, greasy black hair did little to cover the gruesome burn scars that spread down his neck. He, like his brother, had an aura of them that they were willing to kill anyone that annoyed them. Robb had asked the Hound to join his personal guard, offering to pay the man as well as make sure he is fed well and given all the wine and ale he wants. Surprisingly, that was all the man wanted and needed. He said that he would fight for Robb, but also because the little bird, his name for Sansa, asked him to. Robb had brought the man, against Brienne's objections, because the Hound would kill his brother if the Red Viper failed too. My lord, Daenerys greeted, she and Aegon getting up from their seats. The seating had been set on a balcony overlooking the area. One side of the area were the Targaryen counselors, with Prince Doran Martell sitting to the immediate left of the king and queen. Group of empty chairs was obviously meant for the Starks and their retinue. My lady, Robb said, returning the greeting. Ser Loras, Daenerys said, looking past the Starks at the young knight. Grey Worm shall bring you to the arena. Loras nodded, and followed the Unsullied, his squire right behind him. The Knight of Flowers wore his usual ornate silver armor, a green cloak bearing the golden rose of House Tyrell flowing out from behind him. Before he left, Robb noticed that he had a piece of golden silk tied around his sword hand. Robb helped Margaery into her seat before looking into the arena. Interi Lort was already on one end of the arena, armored in steel plate and wielding a broadsword. His shield depicted a mythical-looking creature that Robb couldn't place. He didn't look intimidating, but he certainly looked ready for a fight. I hope your man is good, Stark, Aegon said, skipping over any form of greeting. Watch and find out, my lord, Robb responded. The duel started with an old man, garbed in a rough-spun tunic, walking to the middle of the arena. By the way he held himself. Robb knew that the man commanded some sort of power, but he was curious what sort of man would choose to dress in nothing but a woolen tunic. He wasn't even wearing boots or sandals. That is the High Septon, Daenerys muttered. Or the High Sparrow, as he calls himself. Bloody fanatic, Aegon added, nodding to the man. The High Septon blessed the duel in the eyes of the seven before bowing to the royal couples and returning to the crowd, where he was surrounded by no less than a dozen men, all dressed in a similar fashion, with shaven heads and odd scars on their heads. Emery Lorch, you stand accused of murder and rape. Connaughton called, his voice carrying clearly over the arena. Septa Loras Tyrell has been chosen by the crown as its champion. This is a fight to the death, unless the accuser relents their claim or the defendant admits to committing the crime. Do you understand? Lorch nodded, shutting the visor on his helm. Let the duel begin. Connaughton ordered, taking his seat. Robb leaned forward, feeling Marjorie's hand hold his hand tightly, as the two warriors walked towards each other. Loras was spinning his blade, loosening his wrist and shoulder. The motion looked effortless, and it was a subtle show of his speed and comfort level. Lorch didn't seem to care, rushing the Knight of Flowers like a boar chasing a hunter. He flung his shield forward, trying to shoulder charge his opponent before bringing his sword down at a vicious arc. It was a good tactic. He was attempting to stun his opponent before following with an attack. It was an attack that would have caught the young and inexperienced off guard. Lorch's was young, but he was far from inexperienced. The Knight of Flowers sidestepped the charge, parrying the blade as it came down. Now it was Lorch's turn to go on the offensive. His blade flashed down 1, 2, 3 times of Lorch's shield, chipping away the paint and wood. Each attack was lightning fast and dealt with authority and power. Lorch slowly retreated under the onslaught before stepping further away, distancing himself from the other man. Robb had expected Loras to talk while he spoke, or do something that others would call foolish or prideful. Instead, the young knight was fighting with an immense amount of control and calmness. It was truly magnificent to see, and Robb could see that he was in for a real fight. The youth of the man he fought meant nothing. Lorch attacked again, his bellow muffled under his helm. Once again, Lorch parried the attack, moving away from the man's charge as he did. It was almost effortless the way he moved and fought. When Loras attacked, he didn't allow Lorch any respite. His blade was a flash of silver that Lorch looked unable to keep up with. Robb saw at least 3 strikes that landed on Lorch's armor, hurting the man, but were not fatal. Whenever Lorch tried to counterattack, it was ruthlessly put down by Loras before he continued his relentless offensive to where he was basically driving Lorch around the arena like a mother disciplining her child. But that's when Lorch got desperate. He dropped his sword and shield, diving wildly at Lorch. The two men went down in a clatter of armor and a cloud of dust. Robb and Marjorie both stood, wanting to see what was happening. Marjorie was squeezing Robb's hand so hard that her nails were threatening to draw blood. Lorch was on top of Loras, his helm having been knocked off in the attack, but many could see the victorious snarl on his face as he drew his dagger, opening Loras's visor. "I got you now," he snarled. Loras didn't answer. One arm was pinned down by Lorch's hand while the other was scrambling awkwardly for something. Slowly, Lorch brought his dagger back, preparing the final strike, when Loras's own dagger shot forward, taking the man in the eye. Lorch bellowed in pain, both hands flying to his face, but Loras wasn't done. He grabbed Lorch's dagger and stabbed it into the man's neck. Lorch slowly went limp before falling to the side, allowing Loras to scramble to his feet. Blood poured out of the man's eye, neck, and mouth, but his body was now still as his last remaining life left him. Loras removed his helm and turned back to the royal box, bowing deeply. Marjorie had tears in her eyes as she clapped, a brilliant smile plastered to her face. Robb had a similar smile, applauding the victorious knight. "The gods have made their will known," Connaughton shouted, his voice still carrying over the cheering crowd. "Sir Loras Tyrell is victorious." Line break. Despite the brace of wood and metal around his knee, Gregor Clegane still managed to look terrifying. Clad from head to toe, and the thickest armor Robb had ever seen. He held his great sword point down in one hand, while the other held his ridiculously large shield. The man didn't even seem real. Prince Oberyn Martell looked criminally underprepared to fight the man. He was garbed in bronze-scale armor and leather along with flowing silks, and Robb saw no sign of a helm or head protection. His squire was busy polishing the man's spear, which was not like most spears Robb had ever seen. The blade was at least a foot in length, shape, with a wave-like pattern along its length. The prince himself was sipping from a chalice as he spoke with his paramour and bastard daughters, all of whom looked rightfully worried. Prince Oberyn, on the other hand, had a smile on his face and looked as relaxed as a cat in the sun. The giant behind him seemed to cause him little worry. "Gregor Clegane," Connington said, "you have been charged with murder and rape. This battle will be to the death unless the accuser relents or the defendant admits his guilt. Is that understood?" The mountain didn't move at all. After a long moment, Connington repeated the question. "Is that understood?" he snapped. Slowly, the giant nodded. "Let the battle begin," Connington called. Oberyn blew a kiss to his children and lover as he strode into the arena, catching his spear as he did. As soon as the weapon was in his hands, he spun it with amazing ease, the sun catching on the metal head many times. It was an impressive showing from the Dornishman. "Do you know who I am?" Oberyn asked, a brilliant smile on his face. The mountain didn't answer, simply moving towards the Dornish warrior. Oberyn's spear shot at the giant's face, a strike that was deflected by the mountain's shield. Oberyn laughed, spinning away before his opponent had a chance to attack. "I asked you a question." "Some dead man," the mountain finally answered, still following Oberyn. "I am Oberyn Martell, Prince of Dorne," Oberyn declared. "Stupid cunt is playing with him," Sandor grumbled. Robb couldn't help but agree. Loras had been deadly calm while fighting Amory. Loret against a man who was 10 times deadlier. Oberyn Martelli seemed almost annoyingly careless, though his armor and arms now made sense. He would have been mad to fight the mountain with strength. With his armor, he had the advantage of speed and agility. His only hope against a man like Clegane. His spear also allowed him to attack with getting close. "You were there that night," Oberyn continued, his smile turning to a snarl. "You were there the night my sister died." "Shut up," Clegane growled, his sword smashing the ground where Oberyn had been just a moment ago. "Oh, not until you confess," Oberyn hissed, his spear shooting towards the man's massive chest. Once again, his attack was deflected by the mountain's shield, the head of the spear breaking off paint and wood. "Admit it. You raped her. You murdered her. Say her name." The mountain roared and charged the Dornish prince, who seemed to have been caught off guard by the action. He stumbled back, just barely avoiding the sweeping greatsword that Clegane wielded with amazing strength and speed. Oberyn was able to scramble away, but his spear had been shattered by the mountain in the process. Oberyn caught his spare spear, returning to his confident stride. "You will not die till you say her name." "Elia Martell." "Shut up," the mountain roared. Oberyn was done playing now. He seemed to dance around his opponent. His spear, whenever it wasn't caught by the mountain's shield, bounced off of the man's armor. Finally, after a few minutes of fighting, Oberyn's spear found a chink in the giant's armor, just under the man's arm. His spear darted in and out, and Robb could just hear the infamous night curse under his helm before resuming his attack. "You raped her! You murdered her!" Oberyn shouted madly. "Say her name!" The mountain grunted and swung at the elusive warrior, but Oberyn slid under the attack, twisting around once he was behind the man. His spear sliced into the mountain's leg, severing muscle and probably was close to bone. Whatever was hit, it destroyed the mountain's ability to walk as he fell to both knees. Oberyn strode confidently in front of the man, spinning the spear in his hands. "Say her name." The mountain didn't respond. Oberyn leveled his spear and charged the man, but even on his knees, the mountain was far from defenseless. He brought his shield up just in the nick of time, absorbing the blow as Oberyn broke his second spear. The Dornishman staggered away, just missing being cut in two by the mountain's greatsword. Now Oberyn was without a weapon, and the mountain had yet to be defeated. "For fuck's sake," Sandor grunted, walking up to the edge of the balcony. Unbuckling his belt as he did so, "Finish the fucking job." Oberyn caught the sword, drawing it in one motion. He and the hound locked eyes, an unspoken message going between the two warriors. "Say her name," Oberyn demanded, holding the sword with two hands. The mountain dropped his shield and ripped off his helm. His fat head was red and dripping with sweat. His eyes looked slightly bloodshot, and there was a tinge of blueness to his lips. Elia Martell, the mountain gritted out, spitting at Oberyn's boots as he said the name. I raped her bloody before smashing her fucking head in. He swung his monstrous sword once more, but it was no use. Oberyn avoided the attack before bringing his new sword down on the mountain's wrist, lopping off the man's hand. As Oberyn strode up to him, the mountain lunged at him, but Oberyn lopped off that hand too, a viscous smile on his face. Too slow, big man, Oberyn chuckled before taking the mountain's head. It took the crowd only a moment before the crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Aegon and Daenerys were on their feet, as were Robb and Margaery. Oberyn didn't seem to notice the praise as he kicked the body over. He admired his kill for a few moments before walking back to his daughters and lover, not looking back for an instant. Line break. Thank you for the help, Oberyn said, handing Sandor back his sword. Don't fuck around next time, Sandor huffed, snatching his belt back. Oberyn smiled lightly and returned to his place behind Aegon and Daenerys. The two parties were in the courtyard, with the Starks preparing to head back to their camp. For once, Aegon wasn't being arrogant or rude. He smiled and was showing excellent manners and politeness. You fought well, Sir Loras. Aegon praised. Thank you for bringing justice to my family. Of course, my lord, Loras said with a half bow. Are you due soon, my lady? Daenerys asked curiously. Margaery rubbed her belly. The Maesters think so. I can hardly wait. Children are a blessing. Daenerys said, a slight sadness in her voice. Thank you for your help with the trial, my lord. Robb nodded. As I said, my lady, there were certain formalities that had to be done. I hate them as much as you, but it is what is expected from those in power. Truer words never spoken. Aegon laughed. Margaery suddenly clutched Robb's arm, bending at the waist as her face contorted in pain. Margaery, Robb cried, dropping to his knee. We need to get back to camp. Margaery grunted quietly. Robb nodded and motioned Garland over. With both he and Robb helping, Margaery began to shuffle over to her carriage. For fuck's sake. Clegane growled, sweeping the Terrell Queen up in one motion and carrying her over to her carriage, helping her inside with surprising gentleness. When the Queen was inside, Clegane looked at the men. Let's go. Robb looked at Garland, who looked too shocked to say anything. Get her back to camp. Robb ordered his good brother. I will catch up in a moment. Garland nodded and ran to his horse, hauling himself into the saddle before calling orders to the others to form up on the carriage. In a matter of moments, the carriage and Robb's retinue of warriors were making their way through the streets. Only Brienne remained, holding Robb's mount. It seems that my wife is due now, Robb said a little apologetically. Why don't we meet in a week's time to finish up the final details of the alliance? A week's time, Daenerys agreed immediately. Robb nodded to them both, before walking over to his horse. As soon as he was in the saddle, he and Brienne were galloping out of the courtyard and down the street, after the others. It seems Robb was about to be a father, uttered Sect. Ned sat armored on his mount, watching as his archers traded shots with the men on the walls and the ram and ladders slowly marched forward. The ram was covered, protecting the men pushing it, but the men with the ladders could only hold their shields up and pray to the gods that their arms or legs weren't hit. There were 4 ladders in total, 2 to each side of the ram. A little further back, behind the infantry lines, were the extra ram and ladders that had been constructed in case any broke. The Greyjoy was in the center of the front lines, his massive form hard to miss as he yelled at his men, inspiring them and telling them how many of the sick bastard they would kill once the ram broke through the gate. He was also swapping cheerful insults with Hugo Woe about how many of the buggers each of them could kill. Rickard Karstark wasn't too far behind him in the vanguard, his son and heir Harry right beside him. The men of the north were spread in front of the Lord of Winterfell, who was near the back of the army with the reserves and Old Lord Flint. While Ned knew that he had to keep his focus on the battle, he couldn't help but feel the urge to look back over his shoulder at where Jon and his cavalry were hidden. Ned had given his son 1,000 mounted men, a force that Jon had split in half and given shared command to Eddard Stark. Their only job was to watch the flanks and watch to see if the Boltons would spring any traps on Ned and his men. My lord, the ram has reached the gate, one of Ned's captains said. Ned nodded. Thank you, Captain. Ned's, Howland's, and Jon's plan was very simple. Ned would draw all the men he could to the front gate. Hugo Wall and 1,000 berserking clansmen would certainly achieve that, along with a rampaging Greatjon. Jon would cover the flanks, waiting for a surprise attack that would most certainly come. And while the battle raged, Howland and his men would sneak in and get cat out before Darren and his cavalry arrived to join the battle. There were a lot of moving pieces that needed to be kept in mind, hence why Ned stayed back from the front lines, even though that was where he wanted to be most. He wanted nothing more than to be leading the men of the North forward, tearing through the traitors and rescuing his wife, but he had to play into Rose's hand, at least for now. "Any word from the Company of the Rose?" Ned asked. "None, my lord." A captain responded. "Last we heard, they were a day away." Ned suppressed a sigh and thought about the men he had. Around 8,000 foot in infantry, thanks to the reinforcements from the mountain clans and White Harbor. Jon had lost very few cavalry at Eagle's Roost, and so Ned had most of the 4,000 host of mounted men, though a fourth of that was with Jon. "Send word to Lord Hawker on the western flank. Tell him that his son Eric is to take 500 men from both his father's and Lady Mormont's flank, and report to me," Ned ordered, not watching as the man rode off. "You don't think the sellswords will arrive?" Flint asked, riding up next to Ned. The old lord's son, Brandon the Younger, was with Wall and the other fur and iron-clad clansmen just behind the Greatjon. But Lord Flint himself had given up his desire to fight on the front lines long ago, ever since he had to start using a cane to walk. "Always expect something to go wrong," Ned answered grimly. "Good advice," Flint grunted. "Who taught you that?" "Life," Ned answered, glancing over at the old lord. Flint chuckled. "Aye, it's a wily bitch, ain't it?" "It's had its moments," Ned replied. "So did my first wife," Flint said. "Thank the gods for her tits." Ned laughed. Speaking with the old clansman did a lot to steady his nerves. He could remain calm during a fight, but he hadn't had this much on the line since the trident. His fingers danced on the pommel of his sword, because he was on horseback. He had a normal longsword at his side, while ice remained sheathed across his back. It was a weapon better used on foot. The two men watched as the fighting picked up. The ram was nearly through the gate and the walls were a mess of fighting, as Northerners fought hard to create footholds against the traitors. But Rose knew his stuff as much as Ned did. He had archers firing out of whatever crevice they could, and they were taking a toll on the unprotected men on the wall. With a crash, the ram finally broke through the gate. The Greatjon raised his greatsword and spurred his horse forward, thousands of roaring Northmen and clansmen at his back. Hawker and Mormont charged forward as well, overtaking the infantry, and were the first ones to enter the castle. The clansmen and the Greatjon were right behind them. Lord Karstark split his host in two and sent each half up the ladders to help the men on the walls. This would be the turning point of the battle. Ned's men had to break through, or else they wouldn't be able to take the castle. But they couldn't be too quick doing it, or else Bolton would bring his men away from the fight and further into the castle, where Howland and Cat were. "Lord Stark," Eric Hawker said, riding up to the Warden of the North. "I have 1,000 men with me. Ride west and bring your men to the other side of the castle," Ned ordered. "If the company doesn't arrive, there are ladders hidden in the snow. Use them." Eric nodded. "Aye, my lord." "Barack," Ned said before the younger man could ride off. "Howland Reed and his men are working on getting my wife out of the castle. If you see a small group slip over the walls, protect them. You remember what my wife looks like." "And Lord Reed?" Lord Hawker's son nodded firmly. "I'll watch out for them." "Good lad. Now get going," Ned said. "Line break, Howland." Howland checked around the corner before motioning for his men to follow. Twice already, he and his 3 companions had almost run head-on into a squad of soldiers running to man the battlements or defend the gate. Thankfully, when staying perfectly still, most people don't see what they don't expect to see, and in this case it's 4 Cronogmen sneaking through the castle in the middle of a battle. The Lord of Greywater Watch moved quickly and silently down the hall until he found the room he was looking for. He had been in the Dreadfort before, when Rose had first married. He had taken the time to note down certain rooms, and what they might be used for. Howland's father had passed the habit on to him. The 3 men that were with Howland were some of his best, most experienced scouts. They could move just as quietly through the swamps of the Neck or the frozen tundra of the north as they could through a castle hallway. They all wore the same dark cloak over lightweight leathers and carried a plethora of knives and other tools that could incapacitate a man within seconds. Roose grabbed the handle gently and turned it slowly. Just as he suspected, it was locked. "Done," Howland whispered, stepping away as one of his men went to work on the lock. In a few moments, there was a satisfying click and Dunn pushed the door open. Howland was the first through the door, moving his hood back. Catelyn was standing by her bed, her pillow in her hand. After a quick glance around the room, Howland knew that it was the only viable weapon she had at her disposal. She dropped the pillow as soon as she saw who was under the hood. "Howland," Cat said. Howland put a finger to his lips. "Quiet, my lady, please." Cat quickly nodded, remembering where they were. Howland produced a cloak and a pair of boots from a bag he had under his cloak. "Put these on. Hurry." Catters sat on the bed and quickly changed boots before wrapping the cloak around her. The boots would help her move quietly, and the cloak would hide her dress and red hair. It was slightly shorter than it should have been, but it was the longest cloak. Howland, most Cranagwen were shorter than average height, and even Howland himself was shorter than the Lady of Winterfell. Cat flipped up the hood and nodded. "Let's go." Howland grabbed her hand and led her out, instantly dropping into a slight crouch. The cat tried to copy the action with one hand holding Howland's and another holding up her dress. One of Howland's men scouted ahead of them while the other two watched their back. None of them were prepared to handle any actual fighting. They had knives, not swords. They had nearly made it to the battlements when Howland forced them all into an empty room, as the sound of footsteps came from behind them. While Howland's men helped Cat hide, Howland flattened himself up against the wall, peeking through a tiny crack in the door. "We'll come from behind and crash into the fuckers," Ramsay Snow instructed his captains. The mad bastard wore black chainmail and leathers under a blood-red cloak, the flayed men of his father's house outlined in pink. Howland held his breath as they walked past. Ramsay was so caught up in his own fantasy that he failed to notice the door wasn't closed. All the way, when they were past, Howland counted slowly to 5 before opening the door, checking both ends of the hallway and motioning for his men to come out from hiding. "Where's Ned?" Cat whispered. "Fighting a battle." Howland answered. "Please, my lady, quiet." Howland and Cat had a good relationship. She never treated him like he was different or lesser, because he was from the neck, and she always treated Ned which as his friend, Howland respected. She was also kind, caring, and fair for the most part. She was a hard person to dislike. But right now, Howland was in command of the situation, and if they wanted to make it out of the castle alive, then she had to stay silent. The group found their way outside and found the spot where they had made their way over the rope. As Howland's man unwrapped the rope and grappled from around his body, they all stopped dead when they saw a ladder slam against the battlements. Howland instinctively pushed Cat behind him as he drew his knife, his men doing the same. Eric Hawker's face appeared over the battlements, turning from a growl to a grim smile as soon as he laid eyes on the group of Cranogmen and the Lady of Winterfell. He hauled himself over the wall and landed lightly on the battlements, drawing his sword. He nodded to Howland. "Lord Reed," he said. "My lady." "Eric Hawker," Cat breathed. "Why are you here?" Howland asked. "We were a little late," another voice said. A man who looked very much like Ned climbed over the walls as more ladders were put against the wall. "Lord Reed, Lady Stark." "Who are you?" Cat asked, unable to hide her confusion and shock. "Darren Stark, my lady," Darren answered. "Captain of the Company of the Rose." Line break. John watched the hills to the west carefully, knowing that is where the attack would come from. 1,000 northern horse had ridden east, for reasons John didn't understand. But the action alone would have alerted the northern army to any surprise attack from that direction. When that happened, John pulled Eddard Stark and his men back to him. "Why would Bolton send men to flank us?" Eddard asked. "He needs all his men to hold the walls." "Because Bolton doesn't need the castle or the walls," John answered. "He wants to inflict death before making his escape, or dying himself." "Bloody traitor can't even die with honor," Eddard spat. "He gave it all up the moment he threw his lot in with the Lannisters," John said. "He's free from the burdens that confine men like our fathers." "You think honor is a burden?" Eddard, taken aback by John's comment. John looked at him. "Say Bolton gets away with Lady Stark and makes it to Castle Black and takes the Black somehow before my father can get to him," John said, setting up the hypothetical situation. "Now my father can't touch him if he does that. Not even if he kills Lady Stark. That's because he honors and respects the Night's Watch. Eddard nodded slowly. Aye, that's true, he admitted before adding a few moments later. Would your father really leave him be if he joined the Watch? Gon grunted. The Lord Commander would probably lock the man in an ice cell and wait for my father to arrive. The Watch knows that House Stark still supports it. Besides, I know of at least 2 men who would kill Roose regardless if he wanted to join or not. Jon, Ian said. They're here. Coming over the hills were hundreds of riders, all dressed in black and bearing the pink flayed man of House Bolton. At their head was Ramsay Bolton, whose face Jon had committed to memory since he had been the one to burn Winterfell to the ground. Right, lads, Jon called, drawing his sword. For the north. For the north. Jon and his men charged out from where they were hiding, and galloped full pelt at the Bolton men, their 2 paths set to meet just before the Bolton cavalry connected with the archers. Under Lord Serwyn's command, Ghost was the first to reach the enemy, the albino wolf tearing the man out of his saddle before mauling him. They met in a clash of metal and flesh, with horses rearing in terror, and men shouting their war cries. Jon carved his way deep into the ranks of the Boltons, cutting men down left and right. No shield or armor could stop Frost, and Jon's horse just kept moving forward, bringing the man known as the White Wolf further and further into the bloody skirmish. The 2 groups soon became just a mass of death and carnage, as both horses and men went down. Horses slipped and slid on the muddy earth, avoiding bodies and trampling those they couldn't. Men continued to cry, whether in pain or in anger, and the clash of metal became louder and louder as more men went down. Jon cut down another man, wiping the blood from his eyes. One man had cut a line across Jon's head, with the tip of his sword, as he had fallen out of the saddle, and blood had dripped annoying into his eyes ever since. He finally took a chance to look around and find the man he was looking for. Unfortunately, he wasn't the only one looking for the bastard of Bolton. Septa Wendell was a good man, large like his father and brother, and had handled himself well on the battlefield in the south. He was a knight who fought with honor, and most men he had fought during his lifetime did the same. Unfortunately, Ramsay was a mad dog that Wendell was in no way ready for. They clashed while Jon cut his way through the mass of bodies, but watched helplessly as Ramsay slit Wendell's horse's throat. The animal went down quickly and violently, and when Wendell pulled himself back to his feet, his own throat was slit as well by the waiting Ramsay. Ramsay! Jon roared. Ramsay looked at Jon and smiled. I would love to stay and kill you, but I'm afraid I have other plans. When the bastard of Bolton galloped off, the bastard of Winterfell was right on his heels. The 2 men raced across the hills around the Dreadfort, with Jon following Ramsay wherever he went. The ugly youth was a decent rider, but unlike Jon, he had not grown up in a castle. Jon had been riding ever since he could remember, and knew that he could keep up with Ramsay no matter what. Ramsay finally pulled his mount to a stop, as he turned to face Jon. You just don't give up, he called, his chest heaving slightly. Do you relish death so much? Just yours, Jon said, charging the mad bastard. The 2 men met in a flurry of blows. Ramsay's fighting style was fast and overly aggressive, almost like he was hacking at Jon rather than fighting. But his sword was shorter and thicker, and because they were practically right next to each other, he had the advantage. You know what I'm going to do after I kill you? Ramsay asked. I'm going to return and rape that pretty redhead. Jon's blood turned to ice as his horse backed away. You'll never touch her, he said, tightening his grip on his sword. You won't make it back alive. Ramsay snarled and charged Jon, but Jon was ready for it. Just before Ramsay reached him, Jon danced his horse to his left, giving him more space as his opponent charged by. The bastard of Winterfell parried Ramsay's attack before cutting at the man, feeling his sword bite into the bastard's ribs. Ramsay cursed and held his side as he glared at Jon. I wish I had a chance to flay you, he growled. You'd look lovely next to the squid. Try me, Jon responded. Jon didn't move out of the way when Ramsay charged him. Instead, when Ramsay attacked, Jon took the blow on his vambrace, gritting his teeth as he felt the bones in his arm crack. Thankfully, the metal held. Frost slid in and out of Ramsay's neck in one fluid motion. His death was instantaneous and practically painless, which is far more than he deserved for the chaos and carnage he caused. When the body fell, Jon glared at it, for a second before kicking his heels into his horse and riding back towards the castle where the rest of the Bolton cavalry was being wiped up. Ramsay Snow was dead. Now it was time for Roose Bolton to face justice as well. Line break. Roose. Roose watched from his solar as the battle raged under him. He had watched curiously as Stark threw his men against the gate and the wall around it, neglecting his advantage of numbers. Nevertheless, the plan had worked, and thanks to the barbarians from the mountains, Lord Whitehill and his men had barely been able to contain them. Though the fat Lord of High Point wasn't long for this world, the last Roose saw of the man was him fighting a strong, muscular lad whose cloak bore the tree and sword of House Forrester. Ramsay and his cavalry had arrived, just as Roose wanted, and was about to sweep away the enemy archers, when Stark's own bastard emerged and thwarted that plan. Roose knew that it was wishful thinking that Ramsay and his men could break the northern host with a few hundred men, but it had been a hope. But Jon Snow had destroyed that plan and chased down Ramsay after the cruel idiot tried to escape. And since Snow eventually returned to the battle, that meant that Ramsay was dead. Roose didn't care. No. He had other things to worry about. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Northmen had managed to get around the castle and were now attacking Rose's men from behind. They were being led by Eric Hawker and a man who is said to look like Ned Stark and bore the snarling direwolf of House Stark. Roose knew that the battle was hopeless, but he had fought it anyways. He had no intention of going quietly, not without leaving a pile of bodies for Stark to clean up afterwards. "My lord, Lord Whitehill is asking for more men," Steelshanks said, striding into the room. Rose's longtime captain was covered head to toe in blood, as was his shield and spear. He had certainly done his fare of fighting since he had been the one Roose had sent to cut off the attackers who had gotten behind them. "Denied," Roose grunted. "We're leaving. We're abandoning our men." Steelshanks said, frowned. Roose glared at him. "I don't care." The two men gazed at each other before Steelshanks nodded and straightened slightly. As always, he was loyal to his lord's command and would follow them regardless of his own thoughts. Roose and Steelshanks left the solar and made their way to a room nearby where Roose had been keeping Catelyn Stark. He didn't trust Ramsay around, certainly not when she was his one and only bargaining chip. But this way he was within earshot of anything happening. The Lady of Winterfell had been annoyingly stubborn in all of Roose's attempt to get anything of value out of her. Ramsay had mentioned many times that raping or flaying her would work much faster. But Roose had disregarded his bastard at every turn. Catelyn Stark was his saving grace, as much as she would hate it. Roose broke the cord around his neck that held the key to the door, before swiftly unlocking the door and pushing it open. To his shock and fury, the room was completely empty. "My lord?" Steelshanks asked, glancing behind him. "She's gone," Roose said quietly, looking around the room as if she might magically appear. Roose didn't hear a response, but instead a squelching noise along with a pain grunt. It was a sound that he knew all too well. It was the sound of a sword entering the body and life leaving it. Roose stepped back out into the hallway and saw a massive scarlet-covered blade sticking out of Steelshanks' back, before it was yanked back. When the body fell, Roose felt a shiver of fear run down his spine as he came face to face with Ned Stark. Behind him were the massive forms of Hugo Wall and Greatshaw Number. Roose Stark growled. Roose unsheathed his broadsword and held it in both hands in front of him. Compared to the greatsword ice, it was pitifully small. "If I can't kill your wife, I might as well kill you." Stark flicked the blood from the greatsword before bringing it up as well. "We'll see." The two men launched themselves at each with controlled fury. Roose was a very good swordsman with all the experience that Ned had. He had seen the Warden of the North fight on several occasions during the two wars, and although Stark was not a stellar swordsman, he was efficient and deadly. Unbeknownst to Roose, Ned had worked himself hard to get back into fighting trim, and thanks to Thomas, the healer from the Company of the Rose, Ned was in as fine a shape as he had been during Robert's Rebellion. The two men locked blades as the duel became a test of strength. Roose glared at Stark, slowly working his hands behind his back and grabbed hold of the dagger he kept there. In one movement, he pulled the dagger free from its sheath and was about to plunge it into Stark's eye when he caught Rose's wrist, holding it in an iron grip. Roose struggled for a few moments, trying to break free, but Stark refused to relinquish his hold. One moment, Roose was glaring at Stark. The next he was staring at the Northman who had followed him. He felt an excruciating pain erupt in his back and looked down at his stomach as the tip of a massive greatsword emerged. Then everything went black. Diadem, line break. Eddard. Ned pulled ice from Rosa's lifeless body, watching with grim satisfaction as the traitor landed on the floor, never to rise again. He continued to stare at the body until he heard pounding footsteps behind him. He turned and raised ice, ready for anyone to come around the corner. Jon was covered in blood, but other than a bloody bandage around his head, he looked good. As soon as he saw Ned, he rushed towards him and the two embraced quickly, with Jon holding his left arm awkwardly. Jon glanced down at the Lord of the Dreadfort. Good. Ned agreed. Ramsay? Sam, Jon answered. I got word from Howland. Lady Stark is back at camp and is safe. Howland also reports no extra harm on her. Thank the gods, Ned sighed. Rickard and Maediake are cleaning up the rest of the traitors. Ned. Darren called, striding down the hall from the other direction. Like Ned and Jon. His armor was also colored red. There's something you both need to see. Ned nodded to Greyjoy, who got the message and led the others off to find more enemies while Jon and he followed Darren. He also took the time to speak with Jon. What happened to your arm? Used it as a shield, Jon said wryly. Might have cracked a bone or two, but it paid off in the end. And your head? Just a scratch, father, Jon responded. Ned patted Jon on the shoulder, smiling slightly before turning the conversation on his cousin. I thought you wouldn't make it. The former sellsword glanced over his shoulder. We arrived a little late, but better late than never. Where are you leading us? Jon asked. It's better if you see for yourself. Darren answered, the tone of his voice leaving no doubt that neither Ned nor Jon would like what it was. The three men took a flight of stairs and descended into the bowels of the castle. Standing at one end of another hallway were two sellswords, both of whom looked a little pale. They saluted Darren as he approached. Open the door, Darren instructed. One man nodded and pushed the door open. Immediately Ned was met with the smell of infection and death. It was like walking onto a battlefield covered in bodies that hadn't been moved in a month. It churned his gut and produced a physical reaction from both he and Jon. In the middle of the room was a giant X, with the remainder of a body strapped to it. Ned knew immediately that he was looking at the body of a flayed man. Strips of his skin were torn away. Fingers and toes were missing. The man was starved and stripped down to his bloody muscle. All he wore was a dirty, bloody loincloth that had a dark stain on it. The poor soul had a bag over his head. Darren grabbed the back. Looking at his cousin, Ned steeled his nerves and nodded. Theon Greyjoy, or Theon Turncloak as many northerners now referred to him as, was nothing like the arrogant young man that Ned had left behind. His face was unnaturally pale, and the light in his eyes was barely there. Ned had heard of the phrase dead man walking, but this was an actual case of a man who should be dead and wasn't. This was a dead man stuck to life with barely a thread. Ned heard Jon choke back something and turn away, and Ned wanted to do the same, but he knew that he couldn't. He handed ice to his cousin and drew his dagger. Normally, with someone in Theon's position, he would have him dragged outside and beheaded, but he couldn't allow the boy to be seen in such a fashion, no matter what he did. Whatever evil Rosen, his bastard, had unleashed on Theon, death was a gift, not a punishment. Plays? Theon whimpered, his voice barely recognizable. Ned took a breath. Theon Greyjoy, I sentence you to die. Do you have any last words? Ned's former ward lifted his head using the last of his fading strength. Ned found it miraculous that he could do that much. I am so sorry. Ned nodded slightly before slashing his dagger across the young man's throat, giving him a quick and painless death. Some would say that he didn't deserve it, and while flaying is excessive and banned in the north, there weren't many who would say that he didn't deserve it. Ned wasn't one of those people. He believed in justice, not torture. Eddard VII, Mid laid on his cot, one arm tucked behind his head while the other was wrapped around the sleeping form of his wife. Their reunion had happened in private in Ned's own tent. Neither of them had been able to articulate the emotions that hit them when they saw each other again, but their tears and embrace had spoken volumes. It had been years since they had been apart, and all the while Catelyn had worried that Ned was dead and gone until one of her guards had let it slip that Ned was back in the north. Britain had reunited with Arya when Howland brought her back to the camp. From what Serio told Ned, their first meeting was also filled with crying and hugging. Apparently, Cata had been so overwhelmed that she had overlooked the fact that Arya was dressed in breeches and a shirt and practicing with a sword. One of the best moments that Ned would remember for the rest of his life was when Jon entered the tent after Ned, Arya, and Cat were together again. Flashback. The tent flap was pushed back as Jon entered, ducking his head slightly. The blood on his armor had dried, and while it still liberally covered him, that did nothing to stop Arya from rushing to give him a hug. Jon embraced his little sister before giving her a few words, and allowing her to show Ghost some affection as well. When Arya was off of him, Jon straightened up and bowed to Cat. "Lady Stark, I am happy to see you safe," he said formally. Cat did something that surprised Ned, Jon, and Arya. She walked over to Jon and gave him a hug. It wasn't the kind she had with Arya or Ned, but it was a hug nonetheless and left all three of them speechless.
Thank you, Jon.
Cat said quietly. Jon hesitantly returned the hug before Cat stepped back. "Of course, my lady," Jon said, still stunned. "Father, the survivors have surrendered and they are currently being rounded up as we speak." "How many of them?" Ned asked. "Not many," Jon answered. 100 or so. "Any nobles?" Jon shook his head. Whitehill was slain by Roderick Forrester, while Arnulf was beheaded for treason by Lord Karstark. "What about Ramsay?" Cat asked, unable to keep a sneer off her face. "Good," Jon answered firmly. "I should also add that word has been sent to Lord Glover and the rest of the Company of the Rose. They are to take High Point before coming here. An easy task, but important as well," Ned said. "It's the last castle to fall before the North is once again free." Flashback. Cat hugging Jon had been a miracle happening right before his eyes. Not since the lad was a child had his wife shown him an ounce of warmth or gratitude. Perhaps it was a turning point in their relationship, and Ned desperately wished it was. He was also thinking it was time he told Cat the truth about Jon's birth. She had a right to know. "You're not sleeping," Cat mumbled, not moving. Ned smiled slightly. She had always been able to tell when he wasn't. He brushed her hair affectionately. "Savoring the moment," he whispered. "You're worried," Cat said, looking up at her husband. "I can always tell." Ned leaned over and kissed Cat's head. "I know. Are you going to tell me about it?" Cat asked. "Tomorrow," Ned promised. "I'm up now," Cat countered. Ned chuckled quietly. "I worry about Robb." "Howland said he was fine," Cat said, though she was now beginning to look worried. "Did he say something else to you?" No, Ned said immediately. "I'm sure Robb is fine. He has Brynden and Jan." "What are you worried about, Ned?" Cat asked. "Robert changed when he sat on the throne." Ned sighed, giving in. "I hardly recognized him when he rode into Winterfell, and it didn't get better. He was in a loveless marriage, and he was haunted by the ghost of your sister," Cat explained. "You know how tiring the capital can be. It's a snake pit." "Aye, and I was the fool who got bit," Ned said quietly. "I don't want Robb to become like Robert." "He won't," Cat said reassuringly. "He thrived in the South. He's a great king. He's a great commander." "Cat," Ned said, shaking his head slightly. "Every one of my bannermen told me that, but I worry that Robb won't be able to do what the Southerners expect of him." Cat pushed herself up. "You're worried that Robb will make the same mistakes that you did." "So you admit that they were mistakes," Ned said. Cat huffed and laid back down. "You hadn't been south in over 2 decades, Ned. No one can blame you for what happened." "I can," Ned sighed. "Sleep, Ned," Cat ordered, snuggling closer to him. "Robb will be just fine." "How do you know?" Ned asked. "I'm his mother," Cat said, ending the conversation. Lean break. Ned sat at the head of his war council, one that would hopefully be his last. It had been a few days since the storming of the Dreadfort and Ned's and Cat's discussion. In the past few days, the Northern Army has been counting the dead and giving proper burials to the brave souls who died. To the traitors, there was a ditch. Among the brave dead was Megan Mormont. The old she-bear died when a spear pierced her gut after she took on 12 men alone, killing all but 2 who staggered away from the fight, wounded and terrified. Just like in life, Megan died without fear. Alysanne Mormont was now escorting her mother's body home, where she could be put to rest. In those few days, the rest of the Company of the Rose had arrived as well. led by Galbart and Robert Glover. Ned hadn't expected them so soon, but it turns out that they hadn't lost a single man during the Battle of High Point. Gwyn Whitehill, the last remaining child of Lud Whitehill, gave up her family home without a fight and gave herself up to the Glover brothers. Now she, like Barbary Destin, was under house arrest until Ned could decide what to do with her. "Jon, what's the final number?" Ned asked. 1,000 horse and another 3,000 foot. Jon answered. Ned grimaced. Just as Jon had predicted, Ned's plan had cost a lot of Northerners their lives, even with the help of Darren's men. In such an enclosed space, where Ned's numerical advantage was limited, Rose's men had taken a toll on their fellow Northerners. "What now?" the Greyjoy grumbled. "The traitorous cunt is dead, same with his sadistic bastard." "You all go home," Ned said firmly. "Your fight is over. Return to your castles and collect the harvest while you can." There was a chorus of cheers from the Northern lords, but the Greyjoy didn't look convinced. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Ned. "You said your fight," he noted. Ned nodded. "I have received word from Robb this morning. He is still at King's Landing, and is preparing for the trials of Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch, for the part they played in the murder of Ilia Martell and her child." Ned explained, also Daenerys Targaryen and her nephew, Aegon Targaryen, have returned to Westeros and have taken back King's Landing. Rickard Karstark shot to his feet. "The Targaryens are back, and you say that our fight is over?" Ned gazed at his old friend. "It is. Robb said that he is working on a peace treaty with the Targaryens that would end the war. My lords, we must prepare for winter. Surely you remember what they did to your family." "Ned," Galbart Glover cried. Ned slammed his fist on the table, making a few men jump. Ned glared at the master of Deepwood. "I do, Galbart. I do," he said, speaking slowly and deliberately. "I in the company of the Rose shall sail south and join my son. His child is expected soon, and I have much to talk about with him. I also wish to reunite my family for the first time in over a year." Ned looked around the table. "When you proclaimed my son king, you put your faith in his hands that he would make the right decisions when the time came. If he said that making peace with the Targaryens is the right thing to do, I will not contradict him, nor will I disagree with him. Is that understood?" The others nodded and mumbled their agreements, suitably chastened by Ned's declaration. "Now," Ned continued, "you all will go home, help your people recover and prepare, as best you can, for winter. The North has been torn apart and it needs to be rebuilt." "All right, Ned," Greyjoy said. As always, he was the spokesman for the others. "You've never let us down, nor has His Grace. If these dragons aren't crazy, then they can stay." "Thank you," Ned said. "I march for White Harbor in the morning. I expect you all to leave for home as well." The assembled lords nodded.
That is all, Ned ordered.
As the lords got up and left, 2 men stayed, and another entered the tent. The Greyjoy hadn't moved, neither had Jon, and Eddard Stark stood at the entrance to the tent. "Greyjoy," Ned said curiously. "I'm not here to argue with you, Ned," the Greyjoy grunted, heaving himself to his feet. "I just thought you should know that my uncle Crowfold arrived just a few moments before the meeting started. Your boy Rickon is with him, as well as a wildling woman who seems to be his guardian. I made sure they were sent to Cat." Ned nodded. "Thank you." The Lord of Last Hearth clasped arms with Ned before leaving. "You raised them well, Ned," he said, nodding towards Jon, "but it's nice to have you back as well. Perhaps after we get through winter, we can share a flask and you can annoy me with all your war stories from the south." Ned chuckled. The Greyjoy laughed and walked out, patting Eddard Stark on the shoulder before ducking under the entrance and leaving.
Eddard,
Ned said, "What can I help you with?" Ned's namesake bowed slightly. "I don't mean to take up much of your time, my lord. I only wish to ask a favor." Ned raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Very well. There are a few others besides myself who fought with King Robb in the south as part of his battle guard," Eddard explained. "Most of the Northerners, excluding Dacey and Small John, followed Jon. We wish to go with you and see our king once more. To see our comrades." Ned glanced at Jon, who seemed to agree with the idea. "Their fathers can't go south to see Robb's child. They could act in their place. They do have to gift him something, don't they?" Ned mused. "Very well, Eddard. We leave in the morning until we reach the king. I am putting you under Jon's command." Eddard smiled and bowed. Thank you, my lord. As soon as the Stark boy was gone, Ned and Jon left to find Rickon. It had been years since either of them had seen the boy, and they were anxious to see him again. Just like with Arya, Ned found his wife holding her youngest child tightly with tears streaming down her eyes. A strange woman stood off to the side, her arms crossed as she spoke quietly with Arya about her sword, needle. She was tall and lean, with shaggy brown hair. Ned wouldn't call her beautiful, but there was a certain ruggedness to her. Rickon, Ned called softly, getting down on one knee. Rickon turned his head when he heard his name. The look he gave Ned could have broken his heart. It was one of confusion and apprehension. It was then that Ned realized that Rickon hadn't seen him in over a year, and likely didn't recognize his father on sight. But he did recognize Jon. "Jon," Rickon cried, running over to his brother. Jon was immediately on one knee and pulling his brother into him, holding him tight. The boy was a little taller than the last time Ned saw him, and his auburn curls had grown long and wild. He also looked a little thin, but other than that he looked totally unharmed, and Ned thanked the old gods for that. "Go see father," Jon said quietly, nodding in Ned's direction. Rickon reluctantly let go of Jon as he turned to look at Ned. He walked towards him slowly, uncertainty in his eyes. When he was close enough, he reached out one small hand and ran it along Ned's beard and then up around his eye, pulling at his eyelid a little. Somehow, something inside the boy connected as he threw himself at Ned. "Father!" Ned fought back tears as he hugged his son. "Rickon," he whispered. For a moment he and Rickon stayed like that before he heard a slight cough come from the strange woman. Ned looked up at her and saw her jerk her head outside. Her meaning was obvious. "Go to your mother," Ned said quietly, pulling away from the boy. Rickon wiped his eyes and nodded, taking a step towards the mysterious woman before remembering who his real mother was, and ran to Cat, who picked him up and held him tightly. Ned walked outside with Jon right behind him.
Who are you?
Ned asked. "Asha, my lord," she said. "You son Robb took me prisoner before he marched south." "Why'd he do that?" Jon asked curiously. "I come from beyond the wall," Asha explained. "The other free folk and I found Lord Bran, riding in the forest, and hoped to capture and ransom him. Your son and the other boy, the arrogant one, killed the others and made me a servant. You tried to take Bran captive," Jon said, a hand drifting to his sword. "We were starving," Asha defended herself. "Besides, that was the past. I kept the little lord and the pup safe." "Continue," Ned said, wanting to hear the story. "When your son left, I took care of Bran and Rickon, mainly the little pup in there," Asha said, nodding towards the tent. "Bran had the old man and the Reed children." "Where are they?" Jon asked. "I'll get there," Asha said, sounding slightly annoyed. "Your wife showed up but didn't spend much time with the boys. Then the arrogant boy showed up and took the castle. I took down one of his men before another finally got me." "You mean Tiun," Jon said, connecting the dots. Asha nodded. "He proclaimed himself Prince of Winterfell, or something stupid, and threw most of us in the cells. Those that still lived, that is. After a few days, the bastards started talking about an army outside the walls. The Septon boy got scared and freed us. Well, a few of us." "Who, exactly?" Ned asked. "The old man," Asha started. "Llewellyn, you mean," Jon said. "The Maester." Him," Asha said. "The two boys, the Reed children, and your wife, along with the giant idiot." "Hodor," Jon said, seeing the confused look on Ned's face. "He helped Bran move around after he woke up." "After he freed us," Asha growled, her annoyance more obvious. "He told us to hide in the crypts while he tried to buy his freedom with Lady Stark. That's when Ramsay took them prisoner and burned Winterfell, I assume," Ned said. "I don't know no Ramsay, but that's when the castle burned, Asha said. "We survived and began to go north. I knew that there were enemies in the west, but I knew of at least one ally up north. The Crows, the little lords, said that the Umbers were also trustworthy." "And that's where you ended up," Ned said. "Where did you lose Bran?" "Just after the old man died," Asha said, sounding a little sad. "We had just reached the last river or whatever the girl called it, and they, the giant, Bran, and the other two children disappeared in the night." "Where were their prince heading?" Jon asked. "North," Towards the wall. Osha answered. I tried to follow, but I lost them. What about Shaggy Dog? Jon asked. He should have been able to follow Summer's scent. Asha shook her head, sadly. I don't know what happened to them, my lord, but I didn't want to endanger the pup. I got him to the castle, and the 2 men Crowfoot and Horsebane kept us safe. Fed us. Ned nodded slowly. Very well, I will send a rider to Castle Black, and see if they have Bran. Hopefully they found him. My lord, the Reed boy, I heard him talking to Bran about something beyond the wall. Osha said, I don't know for what or why, but that's where they were heading. Very well, Ned said. Hopefully Jorah and his men will be able to find them. You kept my son safe, but before I thank you, I am curious as to why. You're a wildling. I thought you would have hated Southerners. I ain't no wildling, Osha hissed. I'm a free folk. Very well, Ned conceded. Now answer the question. I swore both boys that I'd look after them, protect them, Osha said seriously. I take my oath seriously. And you have proven that, Ned said, having a newfound respect for the woman. How can I thank you? Osha thought for a moment before shrugging. Allow me to stay with the boy. Watch over him. You want to be his sworn sword, Ned said. Osha shrugged again. Not sure about the title, but yes. Ned nodded. Very well, you've kept Rickon safe for this long. I don't see a problem with you doing so for longer. Thank you, my lord, Osha said, bowing slightly. The action was stiff, and Ned realized that she probably never had to bow to anyone north of the wall. When do we return to Winterfell? Ned shook his head and motioned for her to follow as he went back into the tent. Arya, Cat, and Rickon looked up when he entered. We're not going back to Winterfell, Ned stated, looking around the tent. Why? Arya asked. Robb and Sansa are in the south, and Robb's wife is due to give birth soon. Ned answered, It's been a long time since our family has been together, and I wish for us to be together again. What about Bran? Cat asked curiously. Ned glanced at Osha before answering. Bran is still missing, but we have a good idea where he is. And where is that? Arya asked, before her mother could. North of the wall, Jon answered gently. Why the blazes has he gone there? Arya asked again. Curia, Cat cried. Ned held up a hand, feeling a little nostalgic in the moment. We're not sure, he answered. Osha here said that the Reed children and Hodir are with him, so he is not alone, but he will be found. I intend to send a rider to Castle Black and have him found as soon as possible. In the meantime, I think it's time we see Robb and meet his wife and child.